Clara Whitmore never imagined her father's last phone call would be the one that sold her future. One debt, one ruthless name whispered in fear across the city. Adrian Volkov. One impossible demand: become his wife or watch everything burn. No courtship, no choice, just a contract signed in silence and a wedding that felt more like a funeral. She thought marriage meant partnership, maybe even love. Instead, she got a mansion that gleamed like a jewel, and a husband who looked at her like she didn't exist. Some prisons have golden bars. Hers had a wedding ring. If you're hooked, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far Clara's story travels. The gallery smelled like old paper and linseed oil, the kind of scent that clung to Clara's clothes long after she left. She preferred it that way, something tangible to carry home, proof that beauty still existed in a world that felt increasingly gray. Her latest commission, a series of botanical illustrations for a natural history museum, spread across her drafting table in delicate graphite and watercolor. Foxglove, belladonna, oleander, beautiful poisonous things. She was adding the final veins to a deadly nightshade leaf when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. Clara almost let it go to voicemail. Creditors had been circling for months, ever since her father's medical bills had mounted into something obscene. But something made her answer. Clara Whitmore? Speaking. This is Harbor View Memorial. I'm calling about your father, Richard Whitmore. I'm afraid there's been a complication. The pencil slipped from Clara's fingers. 20 minutes later, she was running through hospital corridors that smelled like antiseptic and desperation, her portfolio bag banging against her hip. The nurse who'd called had been vague on details. Complication could mean anything. But Clara knew her father's heart had been failing for 2 years. Every phone call felt like it might be the last. She found him in ICU, looking smaller than she remembered, grayer. The machines around him beeped in rhythm with her racing pulse. Dad? She took his hand, careful of the IV line. I'm here. Richard Whitmore's eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. When they finally found her face, something like relief flickered there, followed immediately by something worse. Fear. Clara. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. No. His grip tightened with surprising strength. Listen, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you months ago. A cold feeling began to spread through Clara's chest. I borrowed money, Richard said. A lot of money. For the treatments, the experimental drugs the insurance wouldn't cover. I thought I could pay it back, thought I had more time, but he closed his eyes. The debt came due. And the man I borrowed from, Clara, he's not someone you can negotiate with. How much? Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. $250,000. The number hit like a physical blow. Clara's entire year of freelance work barely cleared $30,000. Her savings account held $800.12. Who did you borrow from? Richard's eyes opened again, and this time the fear in them was naked. Adrian Volkov. The name meant nothing to Clara, but the way her father said it, like invoking something dark and inevitable, made her skin prickle. He came to see me this morning, Richard continued, words tumbling out in a rush now, as if he was racing against time. Made me an offer, a way to clear the debt completely. Clara's throat went dry. What kind of offer? He wants you to marry him. For a moment, Clara was certain she'd misheard. The machines beeped. A cart rattled past in the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, normal sounds in a moment that had suddenly become surreal. That's insane, she finally managed. He can't just... People don't... He can, Richard interrupted. And he will. Clara, you don't understand who Adrian Volkov is. He owns half this city, real estate, shipping, casinos. And the half he doesn't own legally... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. He's not a man who hears the word no. So we'll go to the police. With what evidence? Everything was done properly. Contract, terms, interest rates, all legal on paper. Richard's laugh was bitter. That's how men like Volkov work. They make their devil's bargains look like legitimate business. Clara pulled her hand away, stood up, paced to the window. Outside, the city sprawled in all directions, lights beginning to twinkle as evening fell. Somewhere out there was this Adrian Volkov, a man who apparently thought he could buy a wife like he'd buy a car. "I won't do it," she said. "He can't force me to marry him." "No," Richard agreed quietly, "but he can take everything else. The house, it's been used as collateral. Your mother's jewelry, the one thing she left you. He has legal claim to all of it now." He paused, and he made it clear that if you refuse, the debt doesn't disappear. It transfers. To you. Clara turned. "What?" "I listed you as next of kin on the loan documents. I never imagined." Richard's voice broke. "I've destroyed your life trying to save mine. I'm so sorry, Clara." The room felt too small, the walls closing in. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, trying to breathe, trying to think. $250,000. She could work for 10 years and never pay off that kind of debt. Every penny she earned would go to a man she'd never met, a stranger who'd decided she was worth purchasing. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "That I needed to talk to you first. He gave me 48 hours. Richard's voice was fading now, exhaustion pulling him back under. "Clara, I won't force you. If you want to refuse, I'll understand. We'll find another way. Somehow." But they both knew there was no other way. There was only the choice between bad and worse. Clara left the hospital as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. She drove home on autopilot, her mind stuck in a loop of impossible thoughts. Marriage. To a stranger. A man whose name her father had spoken like a curse. Her apartment felt too quiet when she let herself in. The plants she'd been sketching all week sat on the windowsill, perfect and poisonous. She'd researched them meticulously, learned every detail of how they lured in their victims with beauty before delivering death. Was that what this was? A beautiful trap? She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her laptop and typed Adrian Volkov into the search bar. The results were extensive and carefully curated. Adrian Volkov, CEO of Volkov Enterprises. Adrian Volkov breaks ground on new waterfront development. Adrian Volkov donates $2 million to Children's Hospital. Society page photos showed a man in expensive suits at charity galas, always surrounded by important people, always with the same expression: controlled, distant, untouchable. But it was the photos themselves that stopped Clara's breath. He was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful. Sharp. Dangerous. Impossible to look away from. Dark hair swept back from a face all angles and shadows. Eyes the color of winter ice. A mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. There was nothing warm in those pictures. Nothing soft. Just money and power wrapped in a beautiful, terrifying package. Clara slammed the laptop shut and walked to her window. The city glittered below, millions of lights representing millions of lives. Normal lives. People who would wake up tomorrow and make breakfast, go to work, complain about traffic, plan their futures. Simple things Clara had taken for granted until tonight. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her hand shook as she answered. "Miss Whitmore." The voice was male, smooth, and absolutely certain. Not a question, a statement. "My name is Adrian Volkov." Clara's grip tightened on the phone. "I know who you are." "Then you know why I'm calling. Your father told you about our arrangement." "Your arrangement," Clara corrected, anger bleeding through fear. "I wasn't consulted." "You're being consulted now. I need an answer." "You need—" She laughed, the sound sharp and slightly unhinged. "You need? What about what I need? What about the fact that you can't just buy a person?" "I'm not buying you, Miss Whitmore. I'm offering you a solution to an impossible problem. Your father's debt is real, legal, and absolutely enforceable. You can marry me and it disappears, or you can refuse and spend the next decade drowning in it." His tone never changed, calm, factual, as if discussing a business merger. "I'm not a monster. I'm a businessman making a practical proposal." "Practical." Clara's voice shook. "You think marriage is practical?" "This kind is. No love, no expectations beyond appearances. You'll live in comfort, want for nothing, and in exchange, you'll play the role of my wife at necessary functions. That's all." "That's all," Clara repeated numbly. And what happens if I say no? I already told you. The debt stands. I'll collect every penny, Miss Whitmore. I always collect what I'm owed. There was no threat in his voice. He didn't need to threaten. The facts spoke for themselves. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow evening. I'll send a car for you at 7. We'll discuss the details then. He paused. I should mention, I've already had your father transferred to a private suite with the best cardiac team in the state. Experimental treatment, fully covered. He'll recover, Miss Whitmore. Whatever you decide, I keep my word on that. The line went dead before Clara could respond. She stood there in the dark, phone still pressed to her ear, and felt the trap snap shut around her. The car arrived exactly at 7, a sleek black Mercedes with windows tinted dark enough to hide secrets. The driver was professional and silent, holding the door without meeting her eyes. Clara climbed in wearing the only dress she owned that felt appropriate for meeting a man who owned half the city. Simple black, hem hitting just below her knees, the kind of thing you wore to funerals. The thought made her slightly nauseous. They drove through the city as night fell, leaving behind Clara's modest neighborhood for streets that grew progressively wider, quieter, more expensive. Trees lined the roads here, old growth that cost more to maintain than most people's yearly salary. Gates appeared, then walls, then estates that looked like they belonged in European countryside rather than urban sprawl. The car turned through wrought iron gates that opened automatically, swept up a drive bordered by manicured gardens, and stopped in front of a house that redefined Clara's understanding of wealth. Mansion didn't do it justice. It was all clean lines and enormous windows, modern architecture that managed to look both stark and stunning. Light spilled from those windows, warm against the cooling night, but somehow it didn't make the place feel welcoming. It felt like a museum. Beautiful, untouchable, cold. Miss Whitmore? A woman appeared at the front door, early 50s, hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a uniform that screamed professional staff. Mr. Volkov is expecting you. This way, please. Clara followed her through an entryway that could have fit her entire apartment, down a hallway lined with art that she recognized from auction catalogs, originals worth more than most houses, and into a study that smelled like leather and expensive whiskey. Adrian Volkov stood with his back to the door, looking out windows that overlooked the gardens. Even from behind, he commanded the space. Tall, broad-shouldered, perfectly still, like a predator waiting. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, he said without turning. That will be all. The door clicked shut behind Clara, and suddenly the room felt smaller. He turned then, and Clara's breath caught despite herself. The photos hadn't done him justice, or maybe they'd done him too much justice, because nothing could have prepared her for the reality of Adrian Volkov in person. He was devastating. That was the only word for it. Sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could cut glass, dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and those eyes, pale gray, cold as winter frost, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and dissected. Miss Whitmore. He moved toward her with the kind of controlled grace that came from absolute confidence, extended a hand. Thank you for coming. Clara stared at his hand for a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, warm, and over almost before it began. Did I have a choice? She asked. Something that might have been amusement flickered in those cold eyes. There's always a choice. You made yours by showing up. He gestured to a pair of leather chairs near the fireplace, unlit just for show, and waited until she sat before taking the seat across from her, not beside her, across, maintaining distance. I don't believe in wasting time, Adrian began. So I'll be direct. I need a wife, not for love or companionship, but for appearances. My business requires a certain stability. A family man is trusted in ways a bachelor isn't. Contracts go smoother. Investors feel more confident. It's strategic. So why me? Clara interrupted. If all you need is someone to stand next to you at parties, there must be plenty of women who'd volunteer, women you didn't have to blackmail. Blackmail is such an ugly word. Adrian's expression didn't change. And those women would have expectations, emotions, complications. You, on the other hand, have every reason to keep things simple. You don't want this marriage any more than I want the complications of a real one. That makes you perfect. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. You want someone who won't bother you. I want someone who understands the terms. This is a business arrangement. You fulfill your role, attend events, look happy, play the devoted wife in public, and in return, your father's debt disappears. You live here, comfortably, wanting for nothing. When enough time has passed and the business advantages have been secured, we divorce quietly. You walk away with a generous settlement. He made it sound so reasonable, so clean, like he was offering her a job, not a life. How long? Clara asked. 2 years? 3 at most. And in private? When there's no one watching? In private, we live separate lives. This house has 2 wings. You'll have yours, I'll have mine. We'll interact when necessary for appearances, but otherwise, he shrugged. We're strangers who happen to share an address. Clara looked around the study, at the expensive art and the leather-bound books that probably had never been read, at the fireplace that existed purely for aesthetic, everything beautiful, everything cold. What if I refuse? Then I collect the debt as legally entitled. Your father's house, your inheritance, and monthly payments from you until every penny is returned with interest. Adrian leaned back in his chair, perfectly relaxed. It would take you approximately 12 years at your current earning rate, longer if you factor in your own living expenses. You've done the math. I always do the math, Miss Whitmore. She wanted to hate him, should have hated him, but there was something almost honest in his coldness. He wasn't pretending to be a good man, wasn't dressing this up as anything other than what it was, a transaction. Somehow that was worse than if he'd tried to lie. If I agree, Clara said slowly, I have conditions. One dark eyebrow rose slightly. You're in no position to negotiate. Then you're in no position to have your perfect, uncomplicated arrangement. She met his eyes, refused to look away, even though everything in her wanted to. You want me to play a role? Fine. But I won't be a prisoner. I keep my work, my clients, my independence in everything that doesn't directly affect your business image. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Agreed, what else? My father gets the best care available, for as long as he needs it. Already arranged. And when this is over, when we divorce, I walk away with enough money to start over, somewhere far from here. That was already implied in the settlement. Adrian stood, moved to a desk across the room, pulled out a document that looked like it had been prepared by an army of lawyers. Everything you've mentioned is outlined here, along with other relevant details, financials, public expectations, termination clauses. He set it on the small table between them. Read it. Have your own lawyer review it if you'd like. I'll need an answer in 48 hours. Clara stared at the contract. It was thick, official, terrifying, the kind of document that changed lives. And if I sign, then we'll be married within the month. Quiet ceremony, immediate family only. A honeymoon for appearances, 1 week, separate rooms. After that, life proceeds according to terms. He paused. You'll have everything you need materially, Miss Whitmore. I'm not cruel, just practical. There it was again. That word, practical. As if marriage could be reduced to terms and conditions, as if love was just an inconvenient complication to be avoided. Maybe he was right. Maybe Clara's ideas about marriage, partnership, companionship, mutual respect at minimum, were naive fantasies. Maybe this was actually more honest than most marriages. At least they both knew exactly what they were getting into. At least there would be no disappointment when love never came. I'll read it, Clara said, picking up the contract. It was heavy in her hands. And you'll have my answer in 2 days. Mrs. Chen will drive you home. Adrian moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. For just a moment, something flickered in those cold eyes, something that might have been curiosity or assessment, or nothing at all. For what it's worth, Miss Whitmore, I'm sorry your father put you in this position. But I think we can make this work, cleanly, simply. No one gets hurt. Clara wanted to tell him that someone was already hurt, that she was standing there with her future in her hands, bound in legal language, and hurt didn't begin to cover it. But she just nodded and followed Mrs. Chen back through the beautiful, empty house and into the car that would take her back to her small, simple, free life. For now. Clara read the contract 17 times over the next 2 days. She didn't have money for a lawyer, so she researched every clause herself, cross-referenced legal terms, tried to find the trap hidden in the language. But Adrian Volkov, for all his coldness, had been truthful. Everything was there exactly as he'd promised. The debt forgiveness, her father's medical care, her financial security during the marriage and after, separate living quarters, freedom to maintain her career, even clauses protecting her in case of his death or if he violated the terms. It was, she realized with growing horror, actually fair. A fair prison was still a prison. On the morning of the deadline, Clara visited her father. He'd been moved to the private suite Adrian had mentioned, a room that looked more like a hotel than a hospital, with windows overlooking a garden and equipment that hummed quietly instead of beeping urgently. He was sitting up, color back in his face when she arrived. "You look better," Clara said, kissing his cheek. "I feel better. Whatever treatment they started, it's working." Richard took her hand. "Did you meet him, Volkov?" "Yes." "And?" Clara pulled the contract from her bag, set it on the bed between them. "It's everything he promised. Fair terms. Clean exit after a few years. I'd be comfortable, but not happy." "I don't think happiness is part of the deal." Clara tried to smile and failed. "He wants a wife who won't bother him. I want my father to live and my future to not be buried in debt. It's practical." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted this for you, sweetheart. You deserve love. Real love. The kind your mother and I had." Clara thought about her mother, dead 5 years now from the same heart condition, slowly killing her father. She thought about the love her parents had shared. Genuine, deep, built on years of friendship and understanding. The kind of love that made her father still talk to her mother's photo every night. She'd wanted that once, believed in it, but maybe belief was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. "Maybe this is better," she said quietly. "No expectations means no disappointments. No love means no loss." "Oh, Clara." Richard pulled her into a hug. "That's not better. That's just safer. And safe isn't the same as living." But safe was all Clara had left to choose. Keen. She called Adrian that evening from her apartment, surrounded by half-finished sketches and plants that would never be anything but beautiful and deadly. "Mr. Volkov? It's Clara Whitmore." "I know." There was no surprise in his voice. He'd been expecting this call, probably knew what she'd say before she said it. "Your answer?" Clara looked around her apartment, small, cluttered, hers. After today, it wouldn't be home anymore. After today, home would be a wing of a mansion where she lived like a ghost. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Good. If he felt anything about her agreement, satisfaction, relief, anything, it didn't show in his tone. "I'll have Mrs. Chen contact you tomorrow with details. The wedding will be 2 weeks from Saturday. Small ceremony, immediate family only as discussed. My father will need help getting there. Already arranged. Medical transport, full support staff. He'll be comfortable." Adrian paused. "Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Whitmore. I think you'll find I'm a man of my word." "That's what I'm counting on," Clara said. "Because if he was a man of his word, then in 2 or 3 years she'd be free. Free of the debt, free of the marriage, free of Adrian Volkov and his cold eyes and his practical proposals. She just had to survive until then." The line went dead, and Clara sat in the silence of her apartment, her last night of freedom, and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the worst. Probably both. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of arrangements that Clara barely participated in. Mrs. Chen handled everything with quiet efficiency. Dress selection, simple, elegant, expensive enough to look appropriate. Venue booking, a private estate owned by the Volkov family. Catering, flowers, photographer. Everything a wedding should have, minus the one thing that actually mattered. Clara showed up for fittings and menu tastings like an actress learning her role. Smile here, nod there. Pretend this was a choice made from love instead of necessity. The dress was beautiful, she had to admit. Simple ivory silk that draped elegantly, no train, no veil. Not a princess costume, but something a woman would actually choose to wear. Clara wondered if Adrian had selected it, or if Mrs. Chen just had excellent taste. Either way, she'd looked the part. The happy bride. The woman who'd chosen this. Her father was the only wedding guest on her side. Adrian's family consisted of an aunt who looked like she'd never smiled in her life, and a business partner who spent the whole ceremony checking his phone. The ceremony itself lasted 12 minutes. An officiant, hired for the occasion, stood in a garden gazebo wrapped in white roses and spoke words about love and commitment that rang hollow in the perfectly manicured space. Clara said, "I do," and felt like a liar. Adrian said, "I do," and sounded like he was signing a contract, which essentially he was. The kiss was brief, perfunctory, his lips touching hers for exactly the amount of time that looked appropriate for photos. There was nothing there, no heat, no emotion, no spark, just two strangers playing parts. If this was what her life would be like, Clara thought as Adrian's hand rested briefly on her waist for the photographer, she could survive it. She'd survived worse. The reception was small, mercifully brief. Champagne and cake, and her father trying so hard to look happy for her that it broke Clara's heart. Adrian played his role perfectly, attentive enough to look believable, distant enough to maintain the boundary he'd established. By 10 o'clock, it was over. "Ready?" Adrian asked, his hand light on her elbow as the last guest departed. "Ready for what?" Clara almost asked. Then remembered. Tonight, she moved into the mansion, into her new life. "Yes," she said, because what else was there to say? The drive back to what was now supposed to be home felt longer than Clara remembered. Adrian sat beside her in the back of the car, checking emails on his phone, completely absorbed, not even pretending to make conversation now that the performance was over. This is what it will be like, Clara reminded herself. This distance, this silence, this careful avoidance of anything real. She could live with that. She would live with that. The mansion loomed against the night sky, all lit windows and cold beauty. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, still professional at this late hour, and led Clara through hallways she half remembered from her first visit. "Your wing is this way," Mrs. Chen explained, turning down a corridor Clara hadn't seen before. "Mr. Volkov's quarters are in the opposite wing. You'll have privacy here." The rooms were stunning. A bedroom larger than Clara's entire old apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. An ensuite bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people. A walk-in closet already filled with clothes in her size. How had they known? And a small study perfect for her work. A gilded cage, Clara thought, but still a cage. "Your belongings arrived this afternoon," Mrs. Chen said. "I had them placed in the study. I wasn't sure where you'd prefer your art supplies." Clara's throat tightened. Her art supplies. The plants she'd been sketching. The few personal items that made up her entire life. All boxed up and delivered like she was moving into a hotel. "Thank you," she managed. Mrs. Chen nodded. "Breakfast is at 7 if you'd like to join Mr. Volkov, though he typically eats in his study. Kitchen is always available if you prefer something different. Staff quarters are—" "I don't need a tour," Clara interrupted gently. "I'll figure it out." Another nod. "Of course. Good night, Mrs. Volkov." Mrs. Volkov. The name felt like a stone in Clara's chest. When she was finally alone, Clara unpacked her things slowly, trying to make this enormous, beautiful space feel like something other than a prison. Her sketches went on the desk. Her mother's jewelry box, one of the few things she'd saved from her childhood, on the nightstand. Her worn sketchbooks lined up on a shelf. It didn't help. The room still felt like it belonged to someone else. Clara changed into pajamas, her own, not one of the silk nightgowns she'd found in the closet, and climbed into a bed large enough to feel lost in. The sheets were soft, expensive, perfect. She'd never felt more alone. Somewhere in the opposite wing, Adrian was probably already asleep, or working, or doing whatever Adrian Volkov did when he wasn't playing the role of dutiful husband. It didn't matter. They were married in name only, strangers sharing an address, 2 people who'd made a practical arrangement. No expectations, no disappointments, no love, no loss. Clara pulled the covers up to her chin and stared at the ceiling of her beautiful prison and tried not to think about the fact that this was her wedding night and her husband hadn't even said goodnight. This was the deal she'd made. This was the life she'd chosen. And somewhere in the dark, in the silence, in the space between what should have been and what was, Clara finally let herself cry. The first morning, Clara woke disoriented in sheets too soft, in a room too large, in a life that didn't feel like hers. Pale sunlight filtered through curtains she didn't remember closing, painting everything in shades of silver and white. For a moment, one blessed, ignorant moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the wedding dress hanging on the closet door, still in its garment bag, and remembered everything. She was married to a stranger, living in his house, playing a role that would define the next 2 to 3 years of her life. Clara pushed herself out of bed and padded to the window. The garden stretched below, meticulously maintained, beautiful in that controlled way that left no room for wildness. A gardener was already at work, pruning something that looked perfect already, making perfection more perfect. Her phone said 6:47 a.m. Mrs. Chen had mentioned breakfast at 7. The question was whether Clara was expected to attend or if that had just been polite information. Adrian had been clear about separate lives. Did that start immediately, or was there a grace period for appearances? She showered in the enormous bathroom, dressed in jeans and a sweater from her old life, a small rebellion against the designer clothes hanging in the closet, and made her way through the quiet house toward what she hoped was the kitchen. The mansion felt different in daylight, less intimidating maybe, but more sterile, like a showroom waiting for real people to give it life. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors. Somewhere, a clock ticked, but otherwise, silence. She found the kitchen by following the scent of coffee. It was massive, all stainless steel and marble countertops, the kind of space designed for professional caterers rather than actual cooking. Mrs. Chen stood at the center island, arranging what looked like a breakfast spread for 10 people. "Good morning, Mrs. Volkov," the housekeeper said, her expression neutral. "Coffee, please. And it's Clara." The correction felt important, necessary. Mrs. Volkov was a stranger. "Is Mr. Volkov joining us?" "He left for the office an hour ago. He keeps early hours." Mrs. Chen poured coffee into a delicate cup that probably cost more than Clara's old monthly rent. "He typically doesn't return until evening, sometimes later." So that answered that question. Separate lives started immediately. Clara took the coffee, grateful for something to hold. "Is there a schedule I should know about? Things I'm expected to do?" "Mr. Volkov mentioned you're to have complete freedom with your time, aside from events that require your presence. Those will be communicated in advance, usually a week's notice at minimum." Mrs. Chen gestured to a tablet on the counter. "The household calendar is there. Current staff schedule, maintenance appointments, anything that might affect your day. Your wing is clean Tuesdays and Fridays unless you prefer different days." It was all so organized, so efficient, so completely devoid of anything resembling normal married life. "What about meals?" "Cook prepares dinner nightly at 7. You're welcome to join or request something brought to your rooms. Breakfast and lunch are available whenever you'd like. Just let kitchen staff know if you have preferences or dietary restrictions." Clara nodded, trying to absorb it all. She was living in a house with enough staff to run a small hotel, married to a man who'd left for work before she woke up, expected to do what exactly? Exist? Wait? "Mrs. Chen," Clara said slowly, "what did the previous Mrs. Volkov do with her time?" Something flickered across the housekeeper's face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. There hasn't been a previous Mrs. Volkov. Mr. Volkov has never been married before. That stopped Clara cold. She'd assumed, given how transactional Adrian had been about the whole arrangement, that this was something he'd done before, a pattern. But if she was the first, why now? She asked, more to herself than Mrs. Chen. The housekeeper's expression closed off completely. "I wouldn't presume to know Mr. Volkov's business decisions. Will you be taking breakfast here or in your rooms?" The dismissal was polite but absolute. Clara took the hint. "Here is fine. Thank you." She ate alone at an island designed for gatherings, in a kitchen built for parties that apparently never happened, in a house that felt less like a home and more like a very expensive museum. The food was excellent. Fresh fruit, perfectly cooked eggs, pastries that melted in her mouth. But Clara barely tasted it. This was her life now. Beautiful. Empty. Alone. After breakfast, Clara retreated to her study and tried to work. She had a commission due in 2 weeks, a series of botanical illustrations for a private collector. The work had always been her escape, her way of making sense of the world. Beauty rendered in precise lines and careful color. control in a life that often felt chaotic. But today the pencil felt wrong in her hand, the paper too white. The flowers she was supposed to be drawing, cherry blossoms, delicate and temporary, mocked her with their symbolism. She gave up after an hour of producing nothing but frustrated sketches and crossed-out lines. The house beckoned, enormous and unexplored. Clara wandered through it like a ghost, opening doors to rooms that looked like they'd never been used. A library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, every book perfectly arranged and probably unread. A music room with a grand piano so pristine it might have been carved from ice. A gym that could service 20 people. A home theater, a wine cellar, a ballroom. So many rooms, so much space, and all of it felt hollow. She found herself in the main living area, the kind of room featured in architecture magazines. All clean lines and expensive furniture arranged for maximum visual impact. Everything was white or gray or subtle beige. Nothing warm, nothing lived in. A photo sat on the mantel, the only personal item Clara had seen anywhere in the house. She picked it up, studied it. Adrian, maybe 10 years younger, standing beside a woman who had his eyes. Same cold gray, same careful distance from the camera. They weren't touching, weren't smiling, but something in their posture suggested family. That's Katerina, his sister. Clara spun around, nearly dropping the frame. A woman stood in the doorway, early 30s, dark hair, expensively dressed, watching Clara with open curiosity. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear anyone come in," Clara stammered, setting the photo down carefully. "That's because I have a key and you weren't expecting visitors." The woman moved into the room with the kind of confidence that came from familiarity. "I'm Diane Volkov, Adrian's cousin, and you must be the mysterious bride." Clara bristled slightly at the phrasing. "Clara Whitmore." "I mean, Clara Volkov now, I suppose." "Don't suppose too hard. Adrian's never been big on sharing." Diane settled onto one of the pristine sofas, patting the cushion beside her. "Sit. I want to hear everything. Adrian's been frustratingly vague about this whole sudden marriage thing." Clara perched on the edge of the sofa, unsure what to make of this unexpected guest. "There's not much to tell. We met, we decided to get married. It happened quickly." "Clearly." Diane's gaze was sharp, assessing. "Adrian doesn't do anything quickly. He plans. He strategizes. He measures every possible outcome before making a move. So either you're the most compelling woman he's ever met, or there's something else going on." The silence stretched. Clara didn't know what Adrian had told his family, what story he'd crafted to explain the sudden wedding. She didn't know what she was allowed to say. "We wanted to keep things simple," Clara finally offered. "Private." Diane didn't sound convinced, but she let it drop. "Well, simple or not, you're family now, which means you're stuck with me showing up unannounced and being inappropriately nosy." She smiled, and it was the warmest thing Clara had seen since entering this house. "How are you settling in? Is Mrs. Chen taking good care of you?" "Everyone's been very efficient." That's one word for it. Diane glanced around the sterile living room. "Adrian's idea of comfort is minimalist to the point of depressing. You should redecorate, add some color, some life, maybe something that doesn't look like it belongs in a corporate lobby." Clara thought about suggesting changes to a house that wasn't really hers, in a marriage that wasn't really real. "I don't think that's my place." "You're his wife. It's literally your place." Diane leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Adrian needs someone to shake things up around here. He's been in control for so long, I think he's forgotten how to actually live. Everything's business, strategy, calculated moves. Maybe you'll be good for him." The words settled uncomfortably. Clara wasn't here to be good for Adrian. She was here to fulfill a contract, to play a role, to survive 2 or 3 years and then escape. "I don't think Adrian wants things shaken up," Clara said carefully. "Probably not, but that doesn't mean he doesn't need it." Diane stood, pulling car keys from her designer purse. "I have to run. Client meeting in an hour. But lunch next week? I'll show you the city, introduce you to people, help you navigate the whole society wife thing, unless you already know how to handle tedious charity luncheons and passive-aggressive rich women." "I definitely don't know how to handle that." "Perfect. Then you need me." Diane scribbled something on a business card and handed it to Clara. "My number. Text me your schedule and we'll set something up. And Clara?" She paused at the door. Don't let Adrian's walls scare you off. He's not as cold as he pretends to be. He just doesn't remember how to be anything else. Then she was gone, leaving Clara alone in the sterile living room with a business card and more questions than answers. The days developed a rhythm. Adrian left before Clara woke and returned after she'd retreated to her wing. They existed in the same house like planets in separate orbits, never quite colliding. Clara worked on her commissions, explored the city, learned to navigate a life that felt simultaneously luxurious and suffocating. Mrs. Chen communicated the few times Adrian required Clara's presence, a business dinner here, a charity gala there. Clara would dress in the expensive clothes that kept appearing in her closet, meet Adrian at the appropriate time, and play the role of devoted newlywed. He was always polite, always attentive in public, his hand warm on her back, his smile almost convincing. Then they'd return home, and he'd disappear into his wing without a word. The performance over, the distance restored. 3 weeks into the marriage, Clara sat at the dinner table alone again, picking at food she didn't want, when Mrs. Chen appeared. Mr. Volkov asked that you join him in his study when you've finished your meal. Clara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. In 3 weeks, Adrian had never requested her presence outside of scheduled public appearances. Did he say why? No, ma'am, just that it's important. Important. The word carried weight in this house, where everything operated on careful protocol and established patterns. Clara abandoned her dinner and made her way through the house to Adrian's wing, territory she'd carefully avoided until now. His study door stood open, warm light spilling into the hallway. Clara paused at the threshold, suddenly nervous. This was his space, his sanctuary, and she was about to invade it. Come in, Adrian's voice called before she could knock. The study was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, shelves lined with legal texts and business journals. Adrian sat behind a massive desk, still wearing his suit from work, tie loosened slightly. He looked tired, she realized, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there at the wedding. You wanted to see me? Clara stayed near the door, uncertain. We have an event Friday night, major one. Adrian gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. We need to discuss details. Clara sat, hands folded in her lap like a student called to the principal's office. It's the annual Riverside Foundation Gala, Adrian continued, pulling up something on his computer. 500 guests, extensive media coverage, most of the city's business and political elite will be expected to make an entrance, stay for the duration, participate in the auction. That sounds intense. It is. It's also the first major public appearance since our wedding. People will be watching, judging, looking for cracks. His gray eyes fixed on her with that unnerving intensity. We need to be convincing. I thought we'd been convincing at the other events. Those were warm-ups, small dinners, intimate gatherings. This is different. This is where reputations are built or destroyed, where the right impression can secure million-dollar deals or tank them. He paused. I need you to understand what's at stake. Clara felt something defensive rise in her chest. I've played my part at every event. Smiled, made conversation, acted appropriately. What more do you want? I want you to look happy. Not just polite, not just appropriate. Happy. Like you chose this, like we're... He stopped, seemed to struggle with the word. Real. The irony wasn't lost on Clara. He wanted her to fake an emotion he'd specifically designed their arrangement to exclude. That's a lot to ask from someone who barely sees her husband. The words came out sharper than intended. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, that she'd pushed back. You're right, he said after a moment. The distance has been strategic. I thought it would make things easier, cleaner. It makes things lonely. Silence filled the space between them. Clara hadn't meant to say that, hadn't meant to show that particular vulnerability, but it was true. The house was enormous and empty, and she was more alone now than she'd ever been in her small apartment with its thin walls and noisy neighbors. I apologize, Adrian said finally. That wasn't my intention. Wasn't it? You said yourself you wanted someone who wouldn't bother you, someone who'd stay out of your way. I'm doing exactly what you asked. I know. He stood, moved to the window, his back to her. And it's exactly what I thought I wanted. But apparently, what works in theory doesn't always translate to practice. Clara waited, sensing there was more. People are starting to comment, Adrian continued. Not publicly, but in those careful ways that matter in business. Questions about why we're never seen together outside required events. Why you look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Why I seem... He trailed off. Seem what? Indifferent. He turned to face her. Indifference doesn't play well at these things. It makes people nervous. Makes them think the marriage is already failing, which makes them wonder about stability, which makes them hesitant about contracts and investments. So that's what this was about. Not loneliness or connection, but business. Always business. What do you want me to do, Adrian? Gaze at you adoringly? Laugh at jokes that aren't funny? Pretend we have some grand love story when we both know this is just a contract? I want you to try. His voice was quiet but firm. For one night, this gala. Give people something to believe in. Then afterward, we can go back to our separate lives if that's what you prefer. Clara stood, suddenly exhausted by the conversation, by the whole situation. Fine, I'll be the perfect devoted wife for your important gala. I'll smile and laugh and make everyone believe we're blissfully happy. But don't expect me to keep pretending when we're alone. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Clara, she turned. I know this isn't what you wanted, what you deserved. Adrian's expression was unreadable, that careful mask he always wore. But I'm trying, in my own way. I thought distance was kindness. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe you were, Clara agreed. Or maybe we're both just trying to survive something neither of us knows how to handle. She left before he could respond, her heart pounding harder than the conversation warranted. Something had shifted in that study. Some small crack in the perfect cold arrangement they'd constructed. Clara wasn't sure if that was dangerous or necessary. Maybe both. Friday arrived wrapped in anxiety and expensive fabric. The gown that had been delivered to Clara's room that morning was stunning. Deep emerald silk that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. Elegant without being ostentatious. Clearly chosen by someone with excellent taste and too much money. Clara stood before the mirror while a stylist Mrs. Chen had hired worked on her hair, transforming her usual simple ponytail into something sophisticated. Makeup followed, subtle but effective, enhancing without overwhelming. By the time they finished, Clara barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged at a high society gala, like someone who'd naturally be on Adrian Volkov's arm, like a completely different person. You look beautiful, Mrs. Volkov, the stylist said, packing up her supplies. Clara stared at her reflection. Beautiful, polished, perfect, fake. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Car leaves in 10 minutes, Mrs. Chen called. Right, showtime. Adrian was waiting in the foyer when Clara descended the stairs, and for just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, something crossed his face when he saw her. Not quite surprise, not quite appreciation, something else entirely. Then the mask was back, and he was offering his arm like they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. You look lovely, he said, and it sounded almost genuine. You clean up pretty well yourself, Claire replied, taking his arm. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than her old car, perfectly tailored to his frame. If Clara was being objective, which was difficult when her hand rested on his arm and she could feel the warmth of him through the fabric, Adrian Volkov was devastatingly attractive. Too bad his personality was ice. The gala was held at the Riverside Grand Hotel, a historic building that dripped old money and older traditions. They arrived fashionably late, Adrian's strategy, Clara assumed, and immediately became the center of attention. Cameras flashed, people turned to stare. Whispers followed them through the marble-floored lobby. Smile, Adrian murmured, his hand settling at the small of her back. Like you're happy to be here. Clara smiled, bright, warm, completely artificial. Better? She whispered back. Perfect. They moved through the crowd like dancers who'd practiced their routine. Adrian introduced her to an endless parade of important people, CEOs, politicians, society matriarchs, all of them studying Clara with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment. She shook hands, made appropriate small talk, laughed at mediocre jokes, and played her role so well she almost convinced herself. Your wife is charming, someone told Adrian, a silver-haired man whose name Clara had already forgotten. I'm very lucky, Adrian replied, and his hand tightened slightly on her waist. Almost possessive. Clara looked up at him, found him already looking down at her, and for a second the act felt less like an act. Then the moment passed, and they were moving again, circulating through the ballroom, maintaining the performance. The evening blurred into a succession of conversations that all felt the same. Yes, the wedding had been wonderful. No, they weren't planning a honeymoon yet. Adrian's schedule was too demanding. Yes, she was adjusting to married life beautifully. Yes, they were very happy. Lies wrapped in silk and champagne. Clara excused herself to the restroom after the third hour, needing a break from the smiling and the pretending. The ladies' lounge was mercifully empty, all marble and gilt mirrors and a sitting area that probably cost more than most people's homes. She was touching up her lipstick when two women entered, clearly mid-conversation. Can't believe Adrian actually went through with it, one was saying. Marriage was the last thing anyone expected from him. She's pretty enough, I suppose, the other replied, though very common. I heard she was some kind of artist. Can you imagine? Clara froze, hidden by the angle of the mirrors, suddenly invisible. The rumor is it's a business arrangement, the first woman continued. Something to do with his expansion into European markets. Apparently having a wife makes him look more stable, more trustworthy. How practical, though I give it a year before he gets bored and finds a mistress. You know how these arranged marriages go. They laughed, the sound echoing off the marble, and Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. It shouldn't hurt. These women were strangers, and they were right about the arrangement part. But hearing her marriage dismissed so casually, herself judged so harshly, stung more than she'd expected. The women finally left, still laughing, and Clara took a moment to steady herself before returning to the ballroom. Adrian was waiting near the bar, scanning the crowd. His expression when he spotted her was almost concerned. You were gone a while, he said as she approached. Long line, Clara lied. I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look upset. Perceptive. That was unexpected. Just tired. These events are exhausting. Adrian studied her for a moment, then made a decision. Let's get some air. He led her through French doors onto a balcony overlooking the river. The night was cool, autumn settling in, and Clara shivered slightly in her silk gown. Adrian immediately shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was so automatic, so natural, that it caught Clara off guard. Thank you, she murmured. They stood in silence, watching the city lights reflect on the water. Music drifted from the ballroom behind them, but here it was quieter, almost peaceful. What happened in there? Adrian asked finally. Nothing, just overheard some people talking. About us. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. What did they say? The truth, mostly, that this is an arrangement, that you married me for business reasons, that I'm common and inappropriate, and you'll probably take a mistress within the year. The words spilled out before she could stop them, all the hurt she'd tried to swallow. Adrian's jaw tightened. Give me names. What? The women who said that. Give me their names and I'll make sure they regret it. Clara turned to face him, startled by the anger in his voice. You can't. I can do whatever I want. No one speaks about my wife that way. Your fake wife, Clara corrected. In a fake marriage. They're not wrong, Adrian. They are wrong. His hands gripped the balcony railing, knuckles white. This marriage is real. Legally, socially, in every way that matters publicly. And you are not common. You're talented, intelligent, and graceful under pressure. You've handled every impossible situation I've put you in with more dignity than most people could manage. The compliments hit like unexpected blows. Clara didn't know what to do with them. Why do you care what they think? She asked quietly. Because, Adrian stopped, seemed to struggle with the answer. Because the arrangement might be practical, but that doesn't give anyone the right to diminish you. You deserve respect. You've earned it. Something in Clara's chest loosened slightly. It wasn't love, wasn't even affection really, but it was more than she'd expected from him, more than indifference. Thank you, she said, for saying that. Adrian looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something shift in those gray eyes. like he was seeing her for the first time as an actual person rather than a role to be filled. "We should go back inside," he said finally. "The auction's starting soon, and we're expected to participate." Clara nodded, started to remove his jacket. "Keep it," Adrian said. "You're cold." They returned to the ballroom together, his jacket still draped over her shoulders, and somehow the gesture felt more intimate than any of their practiced public affection. The auction was exactly what Clara expected. Obscene amounts of money thrown at luxury items and exclusive experiences. Adrian bid on and won a week at some villa in Tuscany that he'd probably never use. Clara tried not to think about how much money had just been spent on something so pointless. Midnight approached, and the crowd began to thin. Adrian guided Clara toward the exit, his hand once again at her back, both of them exhausted from maintaining the performance. The car ride home was quiet. Adrian checking emails on his phone, Clara staring out the window at the city sliding past. They'd survived the gala, convinced everyone they were believably happy. Mission accomplished. So why did Clara feel more unsettled now than she had before? The mansion was dark when they arrived, just security lights illuminating the path to the door. They walked inside together, footsteps echoing on marble, the late hour making everything feel dreamlike. They reached the point where the hallways diverged, one leading to Adrian's wing, one to Clara's, the natural parting point. "Good night," Clara said, starting toward her wing. "Clara." She turned. Adrian stood in the hallway, still in his tuxedo minus the jacket she was wearing, looking somehow more human than she'd ever seen him. Tired, uncertain, almost vulnerable. "What you said earlier about being lonely," he began. "I didn't realize. I thought I was making things easier for both of us." "I know. Maybe we could try something different. Not constant interaction, but less avoidance. Occasional dinners, conversations that aren't about upcoming events, something resembling normal." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. This wasn't romance. It wasn't even friendship, really. But it was an olive branch. An acknowledgement that complete isolation wasn't working. "I'd like that," she said softly. Adrian nodded. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." Clara made it to her room before the tears came. Not sad tears exactly, but something more complicated. Relief maybe, or hope, or just exhaustion from holding everything in for so long. She hung up the gown, removed the jewelry, washed off the makeup that had made her look like someone else. And when she finally climbed into bed, she was wearing Adrian's tuxedo jacket because it was warm and because, for some reason she didn't want to examine, she wasn't ready to give it back yet. The next morning, Clara woke to find a note slipped under her door. Adrian's handwriting, clean and precise. "Dinner tonight, 7 p.m., main dining room. If you prefer not to, I understand. But I meant what I said about trying." Clara read it 3 times, her thumb tracing over the single initial signature. Then she texted back, "I'll be there." It wasn't much. One dinner. One attempt at something less isolating than the arrangement they'd established. But it was more than they'd had before, and for the first time since saying "I do" in that garden gazebo, Clara felt something other than resignation about her marriage. She felt curious. Dinner became a ritual neither of them had planned but both seemed to need. Not every night. Adrian's schedule was too unpredictable for that. But 3 or 4 times a week, they'd meet in the dining room at 7 and share a meal like 2 people learning a language neither spoke fluently. The first few dinners were awkward, filled with long silences and careful small talk about safe topics. The weather. Clara's latest commission. Adrian's upcoming business trip to Chicago. Conversation that skimmed the surface without diving deeper. But slowly, incrementally, something shifted. 2 weeks after the gala, Clara arrived at dinner to find Adrian already seated, tie loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him. A bottle of wine sat open on the table, not the expensive vintage they served at events, but something simpler. "Rough day?" she asked, taking her usual seat across from him. 3 contract negotiations, 2 conference calls with London, and a supplier who thought he could renegotiate terms mid-deal. Adrian poured wine into both their glasses. "So yes, rough. Did you win?" "Always." He said it without arrogance, just fact. "The supplier will honor the original contract or find himself blacklisted from every major buyer in the region. Clara took a sip of wine, studying him over the rim of her glass. That seems harsh. That's business. You can't show weakness or everyone tries to take advantage. Adrian paused. What about you? How was your day? It was such a normal question, the kind husbands asked wives in real marriages. Clara still wasn't used to it. I finished the Cherry Blossom series, sent it to the client this morning. And? They loved it, want to commission another set for next spring. Clara felt a small flush of pride. It's not a huge account, but it's steady work. You're talented, Adrian said simply. They're lucky to have you. The compliment landed softer this time, less startling than it had been on the balcony. Clara was learning that Adrian didn't say things he didn't mean. Every word was measured, considered, true. Thank you, she said. Dinner arrived, perfectly prepared, beautifully plated, brought by staff who disappeared as silently as they'd come. They ate in companionable quiet for a while, the silence less uncomfortable than it had been. Can I ask you something? Clara ventured. Adrian looked up. Of course. Why did you really need to get married? I know you said it was for business stability, but there has to be more to it than that. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. His expression closed off slightly, that careful mask sliding back into place. Then he set down his fork and met her eyes. There's a merger I've been working on for 3 years. Volkov Enterprises acquiring a major European shipping conglomerate. It would triple our international presence, open markets we've never had access to. He paused. The family who owns the company is old world, traditional. They don't trust unmarried men in their 40s. They think it indicates instability, lack of commitment, inability to build something lasting. So you built a marriage instead. I built the appearance of one, yes. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. They want to see a family man, someone settled, someone who represents the kind of values they hold important. Without that, the deal falls apart. Clara absorbed this. When does the merger finalize? Ideally, within 2 years, hence the timeline I gave you. 2 years. The length of her sentence made concrete by European business traditions and Adrian's ambition. What happens if they find out it's not real? She asked. They won't. As long as we maintain appearances, there's no reason for anyone to suspect otherwise. Adrian picked up his wine glass, studied the dark liquid. You've been perfect at the events. Convincing. Everyone believes we're genuinely happy. Clara thought about the women at the gala, their cruel assessments. Everyone didn't believe it, but she didn't say that. And after, she pressed, after the merger goes through and you don't need a wife anymore? Then we divorce quietly, you get your settlement, and we both move on with our lives, free and clear. He said it so matter-of-factly, like they were discussing a business contract, which Clara reminded herself they were. Doesn't it bother you? The question came out before she could stop it. The deception? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I used to think the ends justified the means. That as long as no one got hurt, the strategy was sound. He met her eyes again. I'm less certain now. Why? Because you're not just a strategy. You're a person who got pulled into this against your will, who gave up your freedom to save your father, who deserves better than to be treated like a chess piece. His jaw tightened. I told myself I wasn't forcing you, that I was offering you a choice, but a choice between bad and worse isn't really a choice at all. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Clara didn't know what to do with this version of Adrian, the one who questioned his own actions, who seemed almost guilty. You're keeping your end of the bargain, she said quietly. My father's getting the best care available. I live in comfort. You haven't been cruel or demanding. By the terms we agreed to, you're being fair. Fair isn't the same as right. Clara's throat tightened. No, it's not. They finished dinner in silence, but it felt different now, heavier, like they'd crossed some invisible line into honesty neither had intended. When Clara stood to leave, Adrian's voice stopped her. I meant what I said at the gala, about trying, about making this less… He searched for the word. Isolating? Clara offered. Yes. You don't have to be lonely here, Clara. That was never the goal. What was the goal? Adrian smiled slightly, and it transformed his face for just a moment. I'm not sure I thought that far ahead. I just knew I needed a wife who wouldn't complicate things. How's that working out for you? It's becoming complicated, he admitted, but not in the ways I expected. Clara left before she could ask what he meant by that, her heart doing something unsteady in her chest. The weeks that followed developed a pattern. Dinners became conversations, became something almost resembling friendship. Adrian started coming home earlier, joining Clara in the library some evenings to work while she sketched. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they existed in comfortable silence, two people sharing space without demanding anything from each other. Clara learned things about him in those quiet hours. That he was left-handed, but had been forced to write right-handed as a child. That he'd built his business empire from almost nothing after his parents died in a car accident when he was 23. That his sister Katerina, the woman in the photo, had passed away 5 years ago from cancer, and he'd never quite recovered from it. She was the only family I had left, Adrian said one evening, his voice carefully neutral in that way that meant the emotion underneath was anything but. After she died, I threw myself into work. It was easier than feeling. But Clara looked up from her sketchbook. They were in the library, rain pattering against the windows, a fire crackling in the fireplace that was actually used now instead of sitting pristine and untouched. I understand that, she said. When my mother died, I buried myself in my art for months, drew the same flowers over and over until my hand cramped, anything to avoid the grief. Did it work? Not really. The grief was still there, just postponed. Clara set down her pencil. But I learned something. The pain doesn't disappear. It just becomes part of you, changes shape, becomes survivable. Adrian was quiet, staring into the fire. Katerina would have liked you. She always said I needed someone who'd call me on my bullshit. Do I do that? Constantly. It's refreshing. He smiled slightly. She also would have torn apart this whole arrangement, told me I was being an idiot, that you can't contract your way into happiness. She sounds wise. She was, and I miss her every day. Adrian's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. I think that's part of why I structured this marriage the way I did. No emotional investment means no loss. Can't grieve what you never let yourself care about. The confession settled between them like a physical thing. Clara understood then. The distance, the coldness, the careful boundaries. Adrian wasn't just protecting himself from complications. He was protecting himself from pain. That's a lonely way to live, she said softly. Yes, Adrian agreed. It is. Something shifted in that moment. Some unspoken acknowledgement that they were both hiding from different things, both using this arrangement as a shield against vulnerabilities they weren't ready to face. Clara went to bed that night thinking about loneliness, about shields, about two people learning to be less alone together. It should have stayed simple, should have remained within the careful boundaries they'd established. But life, Clara was learning, rarely cooperated with plans. She realized something was wrong on a Tuesday morning, 3 months into the marriage. Nausea woke her before dawn, sending her stumbling to the bathroom. She blamed it on the rich dinner from the night before, took some antacid, and tried to go back to sleep. But it happened again Wednesday and Thursday. And by Friday, when the smell of coffee made her gag, Clara felt the first whisper of impossible suspicion. No, it couldn't be. They'd been so careful. That one night, the night that still lived in her memory in fragments of heat and unexpected connection, had been weeks ago. A moment of weakness when Adrian had come home late from a brutal negotiation, when Clara had still been awake reading in the library, when they'd shared too much wine and too much honesty, and somehow ended up tangled together in a way that shattered every boundary they'd constructed. They'd never spoken about it afterward. Adrian had returned to his wing before dawn, and by the next evening, they'd silently agreed to pretend it never happened. Back to separate lives. Back to the arrangement. Except bodies didn't care about arrangements. Clara bought 3 pregnancy tests on her way home from visiting her father, hands shaking as she paid cash like she was purchasing something illicit. She took them to her bathroom, locked the door even though Adrian never came to her wing uninvited, and waited. Positive. All 3. Clara sank to the floor, tests scattered around her, and tried to process what this meant. She was pregnant with Adrian's child. In a marriage designed to end. In an arrangement that explicitly excluded the possibility of this exact scenario. The panic came first, sharp and overwhelming. Then the planning part of her brain kicked in, The part that had gotten her through her mother's death and her father's illness, and the impossible choice that led to this marriage. She couldn't raise a child here. Couldn't bring a baby into this cold, empty arrangement where love was forbidden and emotions were complications to be avoided. A child deserved more, deserved parents who wanted them, a home filled with warmth, a life built on something real. Clara had been surviving in this gilded cage, convincing herself she could make it 2 or 3 years. But a child changed everything. She would leave, had to leave, would save enough money, plan carefully, and disappear before Adrian even knew, before he could turn this child into another contract, another strategic asset to be managed. The decision solidified over the following days. Clara opened a new bank account at a different institution, one Adrian's people couldn't track. Started transferring small amounts from the household account Mrs. Chen had given her access to. Nothing large enough to trigger attention, but enough to build an escape fund. Researched cities far from here, places where she could start over. She maintained the facade perfectly. Still showed up for dinners when Adrian was home. Still made appropriate conversation. Still played the role of dutiful wife at the 2 events they attended that week. But inside, she was planning her exit. 2 weeks after the positive tests, Clara had almost enough saved. Another month, maybe 2, and she could disappear cleanly. She'd leave a note, nothing cruel, but nothing that invited pursuit. By the time Adrian realized what had happened, she'd be gone. The plan was solid, careful, sound. Then everything fell apart on a Wednesday night. Clara was in her study reviewing bus schedules to a city 1,200 miles away when she heard shouting from somewhere else in the house. Male voices, raised in anger, unusual in a place that ran on perfect quiet efficiency. She moved into the hallway, following the sound. It led to Adrian's wing, to his study, where the door stood partially open. "Don't care what Marcus thinks he can do," Adrian's voice, cold and sharp. "Tell him if he makes a move against me, I'll bury him." "He's not making idle threats, Adrian." Another man's voice, one Clara didn't recognize. "He's already contacted your European partners, spreading rumors about instability, about your marriage being a sham. Let him spread whatever he wants. I have documentation, proof, a wife who shows up when required and plays her part perfectly." That might not be enough. Marcus has connections. If he can cast enough doubt, convince the merger partners that your marriage is fraudulent, it's not fraudulent. It's legal, binding, and entirely legitimate. Clara's hand pressed against the wall, steadying herself. Someone was actively trying to destroy Adrian's merger, using their marriage as ammunition. "There's something else," the unknown man continued. "Marcus has hired someone, a professional. We've intercepted communications suggesting he's planning something more direct." More direct how? The kind of direct that eliminates problems permanently. The silence that followed felt heavy with implication. Clara's blood ran cold. "When?" Adrian's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "We don't know. Soon. He's getting desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Double security. I want eyes on everything. The house, the office, anywhere I go regularly. And Clara, make sure she's protected too." "Already done. I've had a team on her since we got the first hint of Marcus's plans." Clara stepped back from the door, mind racing. Adrian had security watching her, had known there was danger, and hadn't said a word. She should have retreated to her wing, should have pretended she'd never heard any of this. Instead, she pushed the door open fully and walked in. Both men turned. Adrian's expression shifted from surprise to concern to something that might have been anger. "Clara, how long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." She looked at the other man, older, graying, with the bearing of someone military or law enforcement. "Who are you?" "James Reeves, head of Volkov Enterprises Security." He glanced at Adrian. "I'll give you 2 privacy." He left, closing the door behind him, and suddenly Clara was alone with Adrian in a room that felt too small. "You were going to tell me when exactly?" Clara demanded. "That someone's threatening you? That there's danger?" "I was handling it. You didn't need to be involved." "I am involved. I'm your wife, at least on paper. If someone's coming after you, that makes me a target too, doesn't it?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "The security on you is extensive. Nothing will happen." "You don't know that." Clara's voice rose, months of fear and frustration bleeding through. You can't control everything, Adrian. You can't just decide what I do and don't need to know about my own safety. I was trying to protect you. By keeping me in the dark? By treating me like a child who can't handle the truth? Clara's hands shook. I've handled everything you've thrown at me. Your cold arrangement, your society events, your perfectly distant marriage. I think I can handle knowing someone wants to hurt you. It's not the same. Why? Because you still don't see me as an actual person, just a role you cast, a contract you signed. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Clara was shouting now, all the careful control she'd maintained for months finally shattering. I gave up my life for this. I live in this beautiful prison, play pretend at your events, smile when I want to scream. And the one time something real and dangerous happens, you don't even think I deserve to know. Adrian stood, moved toward her. Clara, don't. She stepped back. Don't try to tell me this was for my own good. Don't make excuses. Just don't. The silence stretched between them, both breathing hard, years of unspoken tension finally erupting. You're right, Adrian said finally. You deserve to know. I should have told you the moment we learned about Marcus's plans. The admission deflated some of Clara's anger. Why didn't you? Because I didn't want you to be scared. Didn't want to add one more burden to everything I'd already put on you. He ran a hand through his hair, the careful control slipping. And because the idea of something happening to you, of someone hurting you because of me, because of this arrangement I forced on you. He stopped, but Clara heard what he didn't say, heard the fear underneath the words. I can handle being scared, Adrian. I can't handle being kept in the dark. I know, and I'm sorry. He met her eyes. From now on, full transparency. About the threats, the security, all of it. You're right. You deserve that much. Clara wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to the righteous fury that had carried her into this room, but exhaustion was winning, exhaustion and fear and the weight of the secret she was carrying, a secret that suddenly felt more dangerous than ever. If someone was targeting Adrian, if there was real threat, then her plan to disappear became more complicated. She couldn't just vanish, that would raise questions, might put her in more danger. But staying meant continuing the deception, continuing to hide the pregnancy while planning her escape. What are you going to do? She asked. About Marcus? About the threats? What I always do. Remove the problem before it can escalate. Adrian's expression hardened. Marcus made a mistake going after my family. He'll learn that lesson. Family. The word sent something complex through Clara's chest. She wasn't his family, not really, but he'd said it like he believed it. Be careful, she said quietly. Always am. Adrian moved closer, and Clara didn't step back this time. Are we okay? After this? The question was so uncertain, so unlike his usual confidence, that Clara felt her remaining anger dissolve. We're okay, she said. But Adrian? No more secrets. If there's danger, if something changes, I need to know. Agreed. Full transparency. He paused. About everything? Clara's hand instinctively moved toward her still flat stomach before she could stop it. Adrian's gaze followed the movement, and for one terrible moment she thought he knew, but then he just nodded and said, Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll have Reeves brief you on the security protocols. You should know what measures are in place. Thank you. Clara left his study, made it back to her wing, closed the door, and slid down against it. Full transparency. The words echoed in her mind, mocking her. She was keeping the biggest secret of all, planning to leave, carrying his child without his knowledge. Everything he'd just asked her for, she was violating. But what choice did she have? Tell him about the baby and watch him turn it into another contract, another strategic asset, another piece in whatever game he was playing? No. She'd keep her secret a little longer, just until she had enough money, enough of a plan, enough distance to ensure he couldn't follow. Clara pressed a hand to her stomach, to the tiny life growing there that changed everything. I'm sorry, she whispered to the child who couldn't hear her yet. I'm sorry your father and I are both liars. Sorry you're being born into this mess. But I promise you, I'll get us out. I'll give you a real home, real love, everything I never had in this place. She stayed there on the floor for a long time, planning and plotting and trying not to think about the fact that the man down the hall, the man she was lying to, had just promised her complete honesty. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. The next morning, James Reeves arrived at breakfast with a folder full of security protocols and a calm professionalism that should have been reassuring but just made Clara more aware of how dangerous the situation had become. "There are 4 agents assigned to you at all times," he explained, spreading photos across the table. "You won't see them, but they're always there. When you leave the house, they follow. When you're home, they monitor the perimeter." Clara stared at the photos of serious-faced men and women she'd never noticed. 4 people watching me constantly? It's necessary. Marcus Dalton isn't subtle when he decides to make a move, and we have intelligence suggesting he sees you as leverage. Reeves's expression was grim. "Taking you would hurt Adrian more effectively than any business maneuver." The words settled like ice in Clara's stomach. She wasn't just Adrian's wife in name. She was a target, a weakness someone thought they could exploit. "How long has this been in place?" she asked. "Since about a week after your wedding. Mr. Volkov wanted you protected from the start." A week after the wedding. All this time, she'd thought she was alone in the city, invisible, free to plan her escape. But she'd been watched, monitored, every movement tracked by people whose job was to keep her safe, every movement that would make it impossible to disappear without being caught. Clara's carefully constructed exit plan crumbled in her mind. She couldn't just buy a bus ticket and vanish, couldn't pack a bag and slip away in the night. 4 trained professionals would stop her before she made it to the end of the driveway. She was more trapped than she'd ever realized. "Mrs. Volkov? Are you all right?" Reeves was watching her with concern. "Fine, just processing." Clara forced herself to focus. "What else do I need to know?" Reeves walked her through protocols, safe words, emergency contacts, what to do if she noticed anything suspicious. Clara absorbed it all mechanically, her mind spinning with the implications. When he finally left, Adrian appeared in the doorway of the dining room. "That was a lot of information," he said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look pale." He moved closer, studying her face. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call a doctor?" Clara's heart jumped. No, I'm just tired. I didn't sleep well." Adrian's expression softened slightly. "This is a lot to take in. The security, the threats. I know it's overwhelming." "I can handle it," Clara said, perhaps too sharply. "I know you can." Adrian pulled out a chair, sat across from her. "But you don't have to handle it alone. Whatever you need, more security, someone to talk to, anything, just ask." The kindness in his voice, the genuine concern, made Clara want to scream. He was trying, actually trying to be a decent person, a decent husband, and she was lying to him with every breath. "Actually," she said slowly, "I do need something." "Name it." "Space. Just a few hours without security watching me, without feeling monitored." Clara met his eyes. "I know it's necessary, but it's suffocating. I need to feel like I can still breathe." Adrian considered this. "I can have the team pull back slightly when you're in the house, give you more privacy in your wing, but when you leave, they stay close. That's non-negotiable." It wasn't what Clara needed, but it was something. "Thank you." "Anything else?" "Yes," she wanted to say. "I need you to let me go. I need to raise this child somewhere far from here, somewhere safe, somewhere real. I need to stop pretending this marriage could ever be anything but a beautiful lie." But instead, she just shook her head and said, "No, that's enough." Adrian stood but hesitated before leaving. "Clara, I meant what I said last night, about transparency. If something's wrong, if you need something, tell me, please." The guilt rose like bile in Clara's throat. "I will." Another lie. Another betrayal. Another day in a marriage built on contracts and convenience and carefully maintained distance. Except the distance wasn't as careful anymore, and the convenience had become complicated, and Clara was running out of time to escape before everything fell apart completely. That night, alone in her wing with security she now knew was watching, Clara made a decision. She couldn't leave yet. The security made that impossible, but she could prepare, could save money, could research, could plan for the moment when the threats ended and the surveillance relaxed and she could finally run. And in the meantime, she'd play her role. Perfect wife, devoted partner, woman who'd chosen this life. She just had to survive a little longer, just had to keep her secrets a little while more, just had to hope that when everything finally fell apart, because it had to, she'd be far enough away that the explosion couldn't touch her. Clara pressed a hand to her stomach, to the secret growing there, and whispered another promise into the darkness. Soon. I'll get us out soon, just hold on. But even as she said it, she knew the truth. She was holding on to a plan that felt less solid every day, to a marriage that kept surprising her, to a man who was supposed to stay distant but kept becoming real, and to the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to leave as much as she thought she did. That was the most dangerous thought of all. The thought haunted Clara through the following weeks as winter settled over the city in sheets of gray rain and early darkness. She found herself watching Adrian across the dinner table, studying the way he listened when she talked about her work, the small smile he'd developed when she made a dry observation about the society events they attended. He was becoming real to her in ways that terrified her more than any threat from Marcus Dalton ever could. The pregnancy progressed in secret. Morning sickness gave way to an exhaustion Clara blamed on stress. Her clothes still fit, her body not yet betraying what she was hiding. But she knew it was only a matter of time. Soon there would be visible proof, undeniable evidence of that one night when the boundaries had shattered and they'd been just two people seeking connection in the dark. Clara made doctor's appointments under a false name at a clinic 40 minutes away, paying cash, wearing sunglasses like some kind of spy. The security team followed at a distance but never interfered with her errands. She told herself she was protecting the baby, protecting herself. That Adrian couldn't know because he'd turned this child into another contract, another strategic asset. But deep down, in places she didn't want to examine, Clara knew the real reason she hadn't told him. She was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of how it would change the already complicated thing developing between them. Afraid that telling him would make leaving impossible. And she still planned to leave. Had to leave. The bank account grew slowly but steadily. The research folder on her laptop expanded with information about cities, apartments, job opportunities. Every week she told herself it would be soon, just a little longer. Then came the night everything changed. Clara was in her study, sketching half-heartedly while rain hammered against the windows. Adrian was supposed to be at a business dinner downtown, something with potential investors that would run late. She'd begged off, claiming a headache that was only partially a lie. The nausea had returned with a vengeance that afternoon, and all Clara wanted was to be alone with saltines and ginger tea. She was reaching for her cup when the house security alarm shrieked to life. The sound was deafening, disorienting. Clara jumped, knocking over her tea, the liquid spreading across her sketches. Then the lights went out, plunging everything into darkness broken only by emergency lighting that kicked in seconds later. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stay in your room. Lock the door. Security en route." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. This was actually happening. Someone was in the house or trying to get in, and she was alone. She ran to the door, locked it, then pushed her heavy desk in front of it for good measure. Her hands shook so badly, she could barely grip her phone to call Adrian. He answered on the first ring. "Clara, are you safe? Where are you?" "My study. I locked the door." "Adrian, what's happening?" "Marcus made his move. He has people trying to breach the house." Adrian's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Stay exactly where you are. Don't open the door for anyone except Reeves or me. Do you understand?" "Yes, but I'm 10 minutes away. Reeves and his team are already engaging the intruders." "You're safe as long as you stay locked in." A crash echoed from somewhere in the house, followed by shouting. Clara pressed herself against the wall, phone clutched to her ear. "Adrian, I'm scared." I know, and I'm sorry, but listen to me. You're in the most secure room in the house. The walls are reinforced, the door is steel behind the wood facade, the windows are bulletproof. Nothing's getting through, okay?" Clara hadn't known any of that, hadn't realized she'd been put in a panic room disguised as a study. "Okay," she whispered. "Stay on the line with me. I'm almost there." More crashes, more shouting, then a sound that made Clara's blood freeze. Gunshots. Sharp cracks that echoed through the house, impossibly loud even through walls and distance. "Adrian, That's Reeves's team. They're handling it. Just breathe, Clara. In and out. Stay with me. She tried to breathe, tried to focus on Adrian's voice in her ear rather than the sounds of violence happening somewhere in her home. The home that had never quite felt like hers but had become familiar. Safe. Until now. Why? Clara asked, her voice breaking. Why would he do this? It's insane. Because the merger's about to finalize and this is his last desperate play. If he can take you, he thinks I'll back down to get you back safely. Adrian's voice went hard. He's wrong. All he's done is sign his own death warrant. The coldness in those words should have scared Clara. Instead, she felt something almost like relief. Adrian would handle this, would eliminate the threat, would protect her because that's what he did. Controlled situations, removed problems, won. I'm pulling up now, Adrian said. 2 minutes and I'll be with you. Clara heard a car door slam through the phone, heard Adrian barking orders to someone, then footsteps running, getting closer. A knock on her study door. Clara, it's me. Open up. She recognized his voice but hesitated. How do I know it's really you? You asked me why I really needed to get married. I told you about the European merger, about old world families who don't trust unmarried men. A pause. You said, so you built a marriage instead. I said I built the appearance of one. Then you asked what would happen if they found out it wasn't real. Only Adrian would know that conversation. Only Adrian would remember it word for word. Clara shoved the desk aside and unlocked the door. Adrian burst in, and before she could say anything, he pulled her into his arms. Thank God, he breathed against her hair. Thank God you're safe. Clara clung to him, shaking, her face pressed against his chest. He was solid and real, and here, and for a moment nothing else mattered. Is it over? She asked. Reeves has 3 of them in custody. The rest fled. We'll find them. Adrian pulled back enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. Are you hurt? Did anyone get near you? No. I stayed locked in like you said. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and Clara saw something raw in his eyes. Fear. Real, genuine fear. If something had happened to you, Adrian said quietly, if he'd succeeded, but he didn't, I'm fine. Because of luck. Because Reeves had extra security in place. Because... Adrian stopped, jaw tight. This is my fault. I brought you into this world, put you in danger, made you a target. You also protected me. The safe room, the security team, everything. Clara's hands rested on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. I'm alive because of you, Adrian. Not in spite of you. Something shifted in his expression. His hands were still cradling her face, his eyes searching hers. And Clara realized with startling clarity that the careful distance they'd maintained was gone. Shattered as completely as it had been that night months ago. Clara, Adrian started, then seemed to lose the words. She knew what he was going to say, could see it in the way he looked at her, in the fear that still lingered in his gray eyes. The arrangement had become something else. The contract had developed complications. The marriage that was supposed to be fake had started feeling real. And Clara, terrified and exhausted, and still carrying a secret that could destroy everything, did the only thing she could think of. She kissed him. Adrian froze for half a second, surprised. Then he kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her closer. It wasn't like that night months ago, rushed and wine-hazed and almost accidental. This was deliberate, conscious, a choice they were both making. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. We should talk about this, he said. I know. About what this means. About what we're doing. I know, Claire repeated, but maybe not tonight. Tonight I just want to not be alone. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, not tonight. He stayed with her through the night, not in a romantic way. He settled into the chair by the window while Clara curled up on the small sofa in her study, neither willing to leave the secured room until Reeves gave the all clear. They talked in quiet voices about nothing important, her latest commission, his frustrating investor meeting, the weather, safe topics that didn't require examining what had just happened between them. Clara fell asleep to the sound of Adrian's voice and woke near dawn to find him watching her, his expression unguarded in the pale morning light. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." Adrian smiled slightly. "Reeves cleared the house an hour ago. You can go back to your room if you want." "What about you?" "I should probably sleep at some point. It's been a long night." Neither of them moved. "Adrian?" Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you for coming back, for staying, for everything." "You don't have to thank me for keeping you safe. That's my responsibility." "Is it? According to our arrangement, you provide housing and financial security. Nowhere in the contract does it say you have to charge into danger or sit up all night keeping watch." Adrian stood, moved to where Clara sat, crouched down so they were eye level. "The contract is just words on paper, Clara. It stopped defining what we are to each other a long time ago." "What are we to each other?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But it's not what we started as, not anymore." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability, made Clara's chest ache. This was the moment. The moment to tell him about the baby, about her plans to leave, about all the secrets she'd been keeping. But the words wouldn't come. Fear choked them back. Fear of his reaction. Fear of losing whatever this fragile thing between them was becoming. Fear of being trapped in a marriage that would turn real for all the wrong reasons. "I should go," Clara said instead, standing. "Let you get some rest." Disappointment flickered across Adrian's face, quickly masked. "Of course. I'll see you at dinner? If you're not too exhausted." "Never too exhausted for that." Clara left before she could change her mind, retreating to her wing and the safety of space and distance. She showered, changed, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. Someone had tried to kidnap her. Adrian had been terrified. They'd kissed like it meant something, and now everything was complicated in ways that made her original escape plan feel impossible. She couldn't leave now, not with the threat still active, not with Marcus still out there, and not with whatever was developing between her and Adrian demanding attention. She wasn't ready to give it. Clara pressed a hand to her stomach, to the secret that grew larger every day. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "Tell him and risk everything? Keep hiding and let the lies build? I don't know how to do this." The baby, of course, didn't answer, but Clara felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. The next few days passed in a strange suspension. Adrian increased security to the point where Clara couldn't leave the house without 4 armed guards. Reeves interrogated the captured intruders, extracting information that led to more arrests. Marcus Dalton, it turned out, had fled the country, but not before making several damaging phone calls to Adrian's European business partners. "They're spooked," Adrian told Clara over dinner 3 nights after the attack. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his usual perfect composure fraying. "Marcus convinced them our marriage is fake, that I'm unstable, that the whole thing is a business arrangement that will fall apart the moment the merger goes through." Clara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that we're legally married, that you're my wife in every way that matters." He met her eyes. "The problem is, Marcus has documented evidence of the arrangement. Witnesses who can testify that we barely knew each other before the wedding. Financial records showing your father's debt." Ice flooded Clara's veins. "How does he have that information?" "Because I wasn't careful enough. Because I thought the arrangement was airtight and didn't account for someone digging deep enough to find the foundation." Adrian's hands tightened on his wine glass. "The European partners want proof that we're a real couple. Not just legal documents, but evidence of an actual marriage." "What kind of evidence?" "Time together. History. The things couples naturally accumulate." He paused. "They've asked us to come to Austria, to spend time at the family estate, let them get to know us as a couple, see if what we have is real or performance." Clara's mind raced. A trip to Austria meant weeks of constant performance, constant pretending. It meant maintaining the facade while her pregnancy progressed. It meant lying to people who were specifically looking for lies. "When?" she asked. 2 weeks. I know it's short notice, but if we don't go, the merger falls through. 3 years of work, billions in potential revenue, all gone because Marcus decided to burn it down on his way out." Clara studied Adrian's face. He looked defeated in a way she'd never seen. This merger meant everything to him. Validation, expansion, proof that he'd built something lasting. Losing it would destroy him professionally, and it was happening because their marriage wasn't real. Except it didn't feel fake anymore. Not after the last few months. Not after the kiss. Not after Adrian had held her and promised she was safe and looked at her like she was something precious. "Okay," Clara said. "We'll go. We'll convince them." Adrian's eyes widened slightly. "You don't have to do this. I know I've asked too much already." "Adrian." Clara reached across the table, took his hand. "We're in this together. That's what the arrangement was, right? I play my part. You keep your promises. So let's go to Austria and play the part so convincingly they never doubt us." His fingers tightened around hers. "Thank you." What Clara didn't say was that 2 weeks gave her time. Time to figure out how to hide a pregnancy that was becoming harder to conceal. Time to plan what came after, because eventually the truth would come out. Eventually she'd have to tell him, but not yet. Not when everything was balanced on such a precarious edge. She'd give him this. Give him the merger, the validation, the success. Then she'd tell him about the baby and deal with the consequences. It was a terrible plan. Clara knew that. But it was the only one she had. The 2 weeks before Austria disappeared in a blur of preparation. Clara met with stylists who filled her suitcases with appropriate clothing for country estates and formal dinners. She researched Austrian customs, practiced German phrases she'd probably never use, and tried not to think about morning sickness in a foreign country. Adrian worked around the clock, shoring up contracts and dealing with the fallout from Marcus's sabotage. They barely saw each other except at the dinners they'd maintained, and even those were rushed, both too exhausted for real conversation. The night before their flight, Clara packed with hands that wouldn't quite steady. Everything felt precarious, like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't see clearly. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Adrian stood in the hallway, looking uncertain in a way that still surprised her. "Can I come in?" "Of course." He entered her wing for the first time since the wedding night, looking around at the space she'd made her own. Her sketches covered one wall. Plants lined the windowsills, books stacked on every surface. It was messy and lived in and completely unlike the sterile perfection of the rest of the house. "It's nice," Adrian said. "Very you." "Messy and chaotic?" "Alive." He moved to the wall of sketches, studying them. "You're incredibly talented. I don't think I've told you that enough. You've told me. Not enough." Adrian turned to face her. "I wanted to talk to you before we leave. About the trip. About what they'll expect to see." Clara braced herself. "What will they expect?" "Affection. History. The casual intimacy couples develop over time." Adrian moved closer. "I know we've maintained distance, kept to our separate wings. But in Austria, we'll need to share a room. Act like we actually sleep beside each other every night." The thought of sharing a bed with Adrian for weeks, of maintaining that level of deception while hiding her pregnancy, made Clara's stomach twist. "I can do that," she said. "There's more." Adrian stopped in front of her. "They'll ask about how we met, our first date, when we fell in love. We need a story, something consistent, something believable." "What do you suggest?" "The truth, mostly. We met through your father. I needed a wife. You needed help. But instead of saying it was an arrangement, we say it was love at first sight, that I took one look at you and knew." His gray eyes held hers. "That I couldn't imagine my life without you in it." The words spoken in his quiet, certain voice did something to Clara's heart. "And what about me?" she asked. "What's my story?" "You were hesitant at first. I was too intense, too serious, too controlled. But I wore you down with persistence and terrible jokes, and eventually you agreed to dinner." Adrian smiled slightly. 3 dates, and you were mine. 6 months, and we were married. Fast, maybe, but when you know, you know. It was a good story, a believable story, the kind of thing that happened in real life. "What about the part where you barely look at me for the first 2 months of our marriage?" Clara asked. "How do we explain that?" "We don't, because it didn't happen in this version. In this version, I couldn't stay away from you, still can't." Adrian's hand came up, cupped her cheek. "In this version, you're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm terrified of losing you." His thumb traced her cheekbone, the same gesture he'd made the night of the attack. Clara's breath caught. "Adrian, I know we're supposed to be acting, maintaining the deception, but Clara—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with something. "What if we didn't have to pretend? What if some of it could be real?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between the wedding and now, between the dinners and the conversations, and the way you look at me like I'm actually human, this stopped being just an arrangement for me." Adrian's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm saying I care about you, more than I should, more than the contract allows." The confession hung between them, heavy and dangerous, and exactly what Clara had been afraid of. "I care about you too," she admitted. "But that doesn't change what this is, what we agreed to. What if I want it to change? What if I want to try making this real?" "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Adrian's other hand came up, framing her face. "I know I forced you into this marriage. I know you're here because of debt and obligation. But if there's any chance, any possibility, that you might want this to be more than a contract, I'm asking you to tell me." This was it. The moment Clara should tell him everything. The pregnancy. The escape plan. The fact that she'd been lying to him for months. But looking into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope, Clara couldn't bring herself to destroy it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what I want. Everything's so complicated." "Then let's uncomplicate it." Adrian's forehead rested against hers. "Come to Austria with me. Play the role of my wife. And let's see what happens when we stop pretending to pretend. When we just are. And after, when the merger goes through, then we figure it out, together. No more separate wings, no more careful distance, just us, trying to build something real." It was everything Clara hadn't known she wanted until this moment, and everything she couldn't have because of the secret growing inside her. But standing here with Adrian's hands gentle on her face and his eyes full of something that looked terrifyingly like love, Clara made another terrible choice. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's try." Adrian's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually guarded face. Then he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Clara kissed him back and tried not to think about the moment this would all fall apart. Tried not to count the weeks until her pregnancy would be visible. Tried not to imagine the look on his face when he learned she'd been lying all along. She'd give him this. These weeks in Austria, this chance at something real. Then she'd tell him the truth and face whatever came after. It was the worst plan she'd ever made. But as Adrian pulled her closer and whispered her name like a prayer, Clara couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not yet. Not when this beautiful, impossible thing between them finally felt within reach. Even if she knew, had always known, that she'd have to let it go. The flight to Austria stretched through the night, first-class seats that converted to beds, champagne Clara couldn't drink, and Adrian working beside her on his laptop until exhaustion finally won. She watched him sleep, his face softer in rest, and tried to memorize this moment before everything changed. Because it would change. The secret she carried made that inevitable. They landed in Vienna to gray skies and cold wind that cut through Clara's coat. A car waited, not just any car, but a vintage Rolls-Royce that screamed old European money. The driver spoke in German-accented English, navigating roads that wound through countryside so beautiful it looked painted. The estate appeared after 2 hours of driving, emerging from morning mist like something from a fairy tale. Stone and timber, sprawling across a hillside, mountains rising behind it. Clara's breath caught despite her anxiety. "It's stunning," she murmured. Adrian took her hand, lacing their fingers together. The gesture still felt new, electric. "Wait until you see the inside." The family who owned the shipping conglomerate, the Hoffmans, met them at the entrance. Frederick Hoffman was 70-something, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, assessing Clara with the kind of scrutiny that made her feel transparent. His wife Margot was warmer, taking Clara's hands in hers and speaking in careful English. "Welcome, my dear. We are so pleased to finally meet Adrian's bride." "Thank you for having us," Clara said, playing her role perfectly. Their daughter Elise was closer to Clara and Adrian's age, elegant and watchful. "I'll show you to your rooms. You must be exhausted from traveling." Rooms, plural. Clara's stomach dropped, but when Elise opened the door, it revealed one large suite, bedroom, sitting area, luxurious bathroom. One bed. I hope this is suitable, Elise said. We prepared our best guest quarters. It's perfect, Adrian replied smoothly. Thank you. When they were finally alone, Doctor closed behind them. The reality of the situation hit Clara fully. 2 weeks sharing this space, sharing that bed, maintaining the deception 24 hours a day while her body slowly betrayed her secret. I can sleep on the sofa, Adrian offered quietly. If you'd prefer. Clara looked at the sofa, beautiful but clearly not designed for someone Adrian's height. They'll have staff who notice things like that. Separate sleeping arrangements would raise questions. So we share the bed. We share the bed, Clara confirmed, trying to sound casual about something that felt monumentally intimate. That first night set the pattern. They dressed for dinner in the formal dining room, met the extended Hoffman family and various business associates, smiled and touched and played their parts. Clara told the story they'd crafted. Love at first sight, whirlwind romance, a wedding that couldn't wait. Adrian backed her up perfectly, adding details that made it feel real. She was wearing a yellow dress, he said at one point, describing their fictional first date. I remember thinking she looked like sunlight, like something that could chase away all the dark. Claire's heart twisted because he was looking at her like he meant it, like maybe it wasn't entirely fiction. Later in the privacy of their suite, they navigated the strange intimacy of sharing space. Adrian used the bathroom first, emerging in sleep pants and a t-shirt that made him look younger, less guarded. Clara took her turn, changing into modest pajamas, taking anti-nausea medication she'd hidden in her toiletry bag. When she came out, Adrian was already in bed, on one side, leaving her plenty of room. This is strange, she said, climbing in beside him. Very strange. Adrian turned off the lamp, plunging them into darkness. But not terrible. Not terrible, Clara agreed. They lay there in silence, the space between them feeling both vast and impossibly small. Clara was acutely aware of his breathing, his warmth, his presence. Clara? Adrian's voice came soft through the dark. Thank you for coming here, for doing this. I know it's a lot to ask. You've thanked me 3 times already. I'll probably thank you 3 more before we leave. She could hear the smile in his voice. Sleep well. But sleep was elusive. Clara lay awake listening to Adrian's breathing even out, her hand resting on her stomach, and wondered how long she could maintain this before the truth destroyed everything. The days in Austria developed their own rhythm. Mornings meant breakfast with the family, Frederick asking pointed questions about their marriage, their plans, their future. Clara and Adrian navigated it together, their story becoming smoother with repetition. Afternoons were tours of the estate, the shipping facilities, long business discussions Clara wasn't part of. Evenings brought formal dinners and careful performances, and nights meant sharing that bed, the darkness making everything feel more honest. On the 4th night, Clara woke from a nightmare. Marcus's men breaking through her study door, Adrian not arriving in time, and found herself shaking. Adrian stirred beside her. Clara? What's wrong? Nothing. Bad dream. Go back to sleep. But he sat up, turned on the small lamp, his face concerned in the soft light. Talk to me. It was just the attack, my mind replaying it differently. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I'm fine. You're trembling. Adrian moved closer, tentative. Can I hold you? Clara nodded, and suddenly she was wrapped in his arms, her head against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. It should have felt wrong. They were supposed to be maintaining distance, keeping the arrangement clean, but it felt achingly right. You're safe, Adrian murmured against her hair. I promise. Nothing's going to hurt you. The words were meant to comfort, but they made Clara want to cry. Because she wasn't safe. She was carrying a secret that would detonate the fragile thing building between them. And when it did, she'd be alone again. Adrian, she started, thinking maybe this was the moment. Maybe in the dark, she could finally tell him. Yes? The words stuck in her throat. Coward, she thought. Tell him. I'm glad we're trying. This thing between us. I'm glad it's not just pretend anymore. It wasn't what she'd meant to say, but Adrian held her tighter and whispered, Me too. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, And when Clara woke in the morning to find herself still in his arms, the pretense felt more dangerous than ever. A week into their stay, Margot invited Clara for tea. Just the two of them, women's conversation. They sat in a sunroom overlooking snow-dusted gardens, delicate porcelain between them, and Clara knew this was a test. "You make Adrian happy," Margot said, stirring honey into her tea. "I have known him several years through these business dealings. I have never seen him smile the way he does when he looks at you." "He makes me happy too," Clara said, and meant it. That was the problem. "Forgive an old woman's curiosity, but there have been rumors about your marriage being convenient, a business arrangement." Margot's eyes were kind but sharp. "I do not believe in spreading gossip, but I must ask, is there truth to this?" Clara's hands tightened on her teacup. This was it. The moment she could tell the truth, torpedo the merger, free herself from the deception. But she looked at Margot's face, thought about Adrian and how much this deal meant to him, thought about the man who'd held her through nightmares and made her laugh at dinner and was trying so hard to build something real. "Every marriage has practical elements," Clara said carefully. "Adrian needed a partner who understood his world. I needed security. But what started as practical became something more. I fell in love with my husband, Mrs. Hoffman. That part isn't strategy. That part is terrifyingly real." The confession hung in the air, more honest than Clara had intended. Because it was true. Somewhere between the dinners and the conversations, and the way Adrian looked at her like she mattered, she'd fallen in love with him, which made everything so much worse. Margot smiled, reaching across to pat Clara's hand. "I believe you, dear, and I think you are exactly what Adrian needs. Someone to remind him life is more than business deals and profit margins." After Margot left, Clara sat alone in the sunroom and let the tears finally come. She loved him. She was carrying his child. She'd been planning to leave, and now she was trapped in a web of lies so complex she couldn't see a way out. That night, Frederick announced the merger would proceed. Papers would be signed at the end of their stay. Adrian's face when he heard the news was pure relief and triumph. He looked at Clara across the dining table, eyes bright with gratitude and something deeper. She smiled back and felt her heart break a little more. Later, in their room, Adrian pulled her into his arms and spun her around. "We did it. You did it. Clara, they believe us. The merger's happening." "I'm glad," she said, and was. Adrian set her down but kept his arms around her waist. "This changes things. Once the merger's final, the pressure's off. We can stop performing, can just be us." "And who is us?" Clara asked. "I don't know yet, but I want to find out." His hand came up to cup her face. "I want to try making this marriage real, Clara. Not just for show. Not just until the contract expires. Real." This was it. The moment to tell him everything. The pregnancy. The lies. The escape plan she'd abandoned but never quite dismantled. Clara opened her mouth to confess and vomited all over his shoes. The nausea had been building all day, but Clara had pushed through it, taking her medication, eating carefully. But stress and emotion and the rich dinner finally overwhelmed her system. She barely made it away from Adrian before being sick again, her body rebelling against all the secrets she'd tried to contain. Adrian was at her side instantly, pulling her hair back, supporting her. "Clara, what's wrong? Are you ill?" She couldn't answer, too busy being violently sick. When it finally stopped, Clara found herself on the bathroom floor, shaking, Adrian pressing a cool cloth to her face. "I'm calling a doctor," he said, his voice tight with worry. "No!" Clara grabbed his wrist. "No doctors. I'm fine. Just something I ate." "You're not fine. You've been pale for days, exhausted, picking at your food." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "How long has this been happening?" "It's nothing. Don't lie to me, please, Clara, not now." His hand was gentle on her face, but his voice was firm. "What's going on?" Clara looked at him, this man she'd married for all the wrong reasons, who'd become everything she hadn't known she needed, and the truth spilled out. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Adrian went completely still, his expression unreadable. "Pregnant," he repeated, like testing the word. "About 4 months. From that night, the one we never talked about." Clara's voice shook. "I found out a few weeks after the wedding. I didn't tell you because I was planning to leave. I had money saved, cities researched, I was going to disappear before you could turn our baby into another contract. Adrian stood abruptly, walking away from her. Clara watched his back, rigid with tension, and felt everything falling apart. You were going to take my child and vanish, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I was going to protect our child from a loveless arrangement, from being raised in a house where their parents were strangers playing roles. Clara pushed herself up, leaning against the sink. You made it very clear you didn't want complications, Adrian. A baby is the ultimate complication. So you decided for both of us. Decided I didn't deserve to know. Didn't deserve a choice. Adrian turned and Clara saw fury in his face. Did it ever occur to you to tell me? To trust me? Trust you? You blackmailed me into marriage. You bought me like I gave you a way out of an impossible situation. Adrian's voice rose, control finally cracking. Yes, the terms were harsh. Yes, I leveraged your father's debt, but I also kept every promise I made. Your father got the best care. You lived in security. I never touched you without permission. Never demanded anything beyond what we agreed. And the one time we broke the rules, the one time we had something real between us, you hid the consequences and planned to run. Because I was scared, Clara shouted back. Because I didn't know what you'd do. Because this whole thing was supposed to be temporary and clean, and now there's a baby and feelings and everything's a mess. You're damn right it's a mess. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, breathing hard. But hiding it? Lying to me for months? That's not protecting our child, Clara. That's not trusting your husband. You're not really my husband, not in the ways that matter. The words came out cruel, meant to wound. They hit their mark. Adrian's expression shuddered completely. Right, of course, that this was all just an arrangement. The dinners, the conversations, the way you kissed me like it meant something, all just part of the performance. His voice went cold, distant. My mistake for thinking it could be real. He walked out of the bathroom, and Clara heard him moving around the bedroom, gathering things. What are you doing? She called. Giving you what you obviously want. Space, distance. I'll sleep in the library tonight, maybe for the rest of our stay. Adrian appeared in the doorway, coat in hand, face carefully blank. Congratulations, Clara. You're free to keep your secrets and plan your escape. I won't stand in your way. Adrian. But he was gone, the sweet door closing quietly behind him, and Clara was alone with her truth and her fear and the baby she'd hidden for so long. She sank to the floor and finally let herself completely fall apart. The next morning, Clara woke alone in the too-large bed, eyes swollen from crying, and knew she'd destroyed everything. Adrian hadn't returned during the night. When she made her way downstairs for breakfast, the Hoffmans informed her he'd left early for the shipping facilities. Urgent business that couldn't wait. Running from her, Clara realized, just like she'd planned to run from him. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. She spent the day in the suite, unable to face anyone, unable to eat. Margot sent up tea and pastries with a note. Whatever is wrong, it can be fixed. Talk to each other. But how could Clara fix this? She'd lied, hidden, planned betrayal. And Adrian's face when she'd said he wasn't really her husband. She'd meant to hurt him, and she had. Deeply. Evening fell, and still Adrian didn't return. Clara stood at the window watching snow begin to fall, one hand on her stomach, and whispered to the child growing there. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was trying to protect you, but I think I just ruined everything instead. Talking to yourself? Clara spun. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in his coat, snow melting in his dark hair. He looked exhausted. I thought you weren't coming back, Clara said. I almost didn't. Adrian moved into the room, peeling off his coat. I drove around for hours. Went to the shipping offices and pretended to work. Considered sleeping in my car like a coward. Why didn't you? Because Margot cornered me at dinner. Yes, I tried to skip that too, and gave me a lecture about marriage and pride and not letting fear destroy something precious. Adrian's laugh was bitter. Apparently our performance was too good. She thinks we're genuinely in love. We are, Clara said quietly. At least I am. I love you, Adrian. That's why I was so scared. Adrian went very still. What? I fell in love with you somewhere between the dinners and the conversations, and the way you held me through nightmares. I fell in love with my husband, and it terrified me because it wasn't part of the plan. You were supposed to stay distant and cold and easy to leave. Clara's voice broke. But you became real and kind, and someone I couldn't imagine my life without. So I hid the pregnancy because I was scared you'd turn our child into another contract. Or worse, that you'd only stay with me because of obligation, not choice. Adrian crossed the room slowly, stopping in front of her. You really think I'd do that? After everything? I didn't know what to think. Everything between us happened so fast, and I kept waiting for you to go back to being the cold businessman who offered me an arrangement, kept waiting for the distance to return. It's not returning, Clara. I tried. Spent 4 months trying to keep you at arm's length because I thought that's what we both wanted. But I fell for you anyway. Adrian's hands framed her face, gentle despite his anger. I fell for the woman who called me on my bullshit and made my empty house feel like a home and looked at me like I was more than my bank account. So no, I wouldn't turn our child into a contract. I'd be terrified and clueless and probably make 1,000 mistakes, but I'd be there. If you'd let me. Clara's tears spilled over. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I was wrong to hide it, wrong to plan to leave, wrong about everything. You were scared, I get that. I made you scared by building this marriage on distance and contracts instead of trust. Adrian's thumbs brushed away her tears. But we can fix this. If you want to, if you're willing to try. How? How do we fix this mess? We start over. Not the marriage that's legal and binding and apparently convincing enough to fool the Hoffmans, but the foundation. We build it on honesty this time, on choice. Adrian's voice went soft. I don't want you here because of a contract, Clara. I want you here because you choose to be, because you want this marriage as much as I do. I do want it, Clara whispered. I want you. I want this family we're accidentally building. I'm just scared of losing it. Then we'll be scared together, and we'll figure it out together. No more secrets, no more running, no more pretending. Adrian's forehead rested against hers. We're having a baby, Clara. That's terrifying and wonderful and completely unplanned, but I want to do this with you. Want to be your husband for real, not just on paper. Clara's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. What about the merger, the Hoffmans? If we're being honest, shouldn't we tell them the marriage started as an arrangement? The marriage started as an arrangement. What it is now is something else entirely. Adrian smiled slightly. Besides, Margot already knows something was off. She just doesn't care because she sees what we see. Two people who found something real in the middle of something practical. What do we see? A future, a family, a marriage built on choice instead of obligation. Adrian's hand moved to rest over Clara's on her stomach. How far along are you? Almost 4 months. The baby's due in May. May. Adrian's expression was wonder mixed with terror. We're having a baby in May. You're really okay with this? I'm terrified. But yes, I'm okay with it. More than okay. His hand pressed gently against her stomach. This is ours, Clara. A person we made together. How could I not want that? Clara felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of fear she'd carried for months finally releasing. I'm terrified too. Good, we can be terrified together. Adrian pulled her close, and Clara buried her face in his chest, breathing him in. No more running? No more running, Clara promised. I'm staying, for real this time. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of the suite while snow fell outside and the future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but no longer impossible. Finally, Adrian pulled back enough to look at her. We should probably tell the Hoffmans, about the baby, I mean. Margot will be thrilled. She'll probably start knitting immediately, Clara agreed. But Adrian, can we have one night, just us, before we tell everyone and it becomes real to the world? One night to just be two people figuring this out? Adrian smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. One night, then tomorrow, we face everything together. They ordered dinner to their suite, simple food that wouldn't upset Clara's stomach. They talked for hours about the baby, about fears and hopes, about turning the mansion into a home that could hold a family. Adrian asked questions about her pregnancy, apologizing for every moment he'd missed because she hadn't felt safe telling him. "I want to be at the appointments," he said. "Want to see the ultrasounds, hear the heartbeat, all of it, if that's okay." "More than okay," Clara said. "I'd like that." Later, in the darkness of their shared bed, Adrian's hand rested on her stomach, still flat, but not for much longer. "Hi in there," he said softly, and Clara's heart melted. "I'm your father. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try my best. And your mother is brilliant and brave and terrifying, so you're already winning." Clara laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "Terrifying?" "In the best way." Adrian kissed her forehead. "Sleep. You need rest. Growing a human is exhausting work." Says the man who's never grown a human. "Exactly, which is why I defer to your expertise." His arms tightened around her. "I love you, Clara. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you." "I love you too," Clara whispered. "So much it scares me." "Good scared or bad scared?" "Good scared. The kind that means it matters." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in months, Clara slept without nightmares. The next morning, they told the Hoffmans over breakfast. Margot's shriek of delight probably echoed through the entire estate. Frederick smiled his first genuine smile and ordered champagne, sparkling cider for Clara. Even Elise seemed genuinely happy. "This is wonderful news," Margot said, already planning the nursery in her mind, suggesting names and doctors and all the things grandmothers at heart thought about. "You must be so excited." "We are," Adrian said, his hand finding Clara's under the table. "Terrified but excited. That is parenthood in summary," Frederick said with a laugh. "Terror and joy in equal measure." The merger papers were signed that afternoon in Frederick's study, years of work culminating in signatures and handshakes. But the celebration felt secondary to the real news, the baby that would arrive in spring, the family being built from unexpected foundations. They flew home 3 days later, Clara's hand in Adrian's the entire flight. The mansion waited, but it didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a beginning. The first thing Adrian did was open the connecting door between their wings. "No more separation," he said. "We're making this a home. Together." They moved Clara's things into the master bedroom, his bedroom, now theirs, combined their spaces, hung her sketches on the walls, brought in plants and books and all the lived-in chaos Clara brought with her. The sterile perfection transformed into something warm. Adrian threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he'd brought to business. He researched cribs and car seats and read parenting books with hilarious seriousness. He accompanied Clara to every doctor's appointment, his face going soft with wonder every time they heard the baby's heartbeat. "It's real," he'd say every time. "We're really doing this." Clara's father recovered enough to visit, and when they told him about the baby, his tears were happy ones. "I'm sorry," he told Adrian, "for putting you both in this position, for the debt that forced this marriage." "Don't be," Adrian said, surprising them both. "If you hadn't, I never would have met Clara, never would have fallen in love, never would have this." He gestured to Clara's visible belly, 5 months now, unmistakably pregnant. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. The pregnancy progressed. Clara's belly grew. Adrian talked to their daughter every night. They'd learned it was a girl at the 20-week ultrasound, and Adrian had cried. "Elena," he'd suggested, "after my sister, if that's okay." "It's perfect," Clara had agreed. They transformed a room near the master bedroom into a nursery. Soft yellows and gentle greens since Clara refused the stereotypical pink. Adrian assembled furniture with endearing incompetence, cursing at instruction manuals while Clara laughed from her perch on the rocking chair. "I run a billion-dollar empire," he muttered, "but this crib is defeating me." "Want help?" "Absolutely not. This is a matter of pride now." He eventually got it assembled, looking triumphant despite the 3 extra screws sitting on the floor. Winter gave way to spring. The gardens bloomed. Clara's due date approached. And the mansion that had once felt like a beautiful prison transformed into a home filled with laughter and love and the anticipation of new life. Elena arrived on a rainy May morning after 12 hours of labor that Adrian later described as the most terrifying experience of my life. "You weren't the one in labor," Clara pointed out. No, but I had to watch you in pain and feel completely helpless. That's its own kind of hell. But when the nurse placed Elena in Adrian's arms for the first time, his face transformed with such pure love that Clara fell for him all over again. "Hi, little one," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm your dad, and I promise you, every day for the rest of my life, I'll be here. I'll show up. I'll love you and your mother with everything I have." Clara watched her husband hold their daughter and felt something click into place. This was what she'd been afraid of losing. This was what she'd almost run from, this impossible, beautiful family they'd built from a contract in convenience and unexpected love. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and occasionally terrifying. Adrian changed diapers with surprising competence. Clara navigated breastfeeding and sleep deprivation. They took turns with night feedings, stumbling through the dark house together, learning Elena's cries and needs. The mansion filled with life, baby toys in the living room, a swing in the library, tiny clothes in the laundry. Mrs. Chen became an honorary grandmother, spoiling Elena shamelessly. Diane visited weekly, bringing gifts and advice and laughter. Claire's father regained enough strength to hold his granddaughter, tears in his eyes. "You gave me this," he said to Adrian. "Time to see her grow up. I can never repay that." "You already did," Adrian said. "You gave me Clara. Everything else is just bonus." On Elena's first birthday, they threw a party in the gardens Clara had once thought too controlled, too perfect. Now they were filled with children from the neighborhood, balloons, cake smeared on happy faces. Elena sat in her high chair, fascinated by her smashed cake, and Clara watched Adrian help their daughter destroy it with pure joy on his face. "Happy?" he asked, catching Clara watching. "Deliriously," she said. That night, after Elena was asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Adrian sat on the balcony off their bedroom, the same balcony where Adrian had once draped his jacket over her shoulders at the gala. "Do you ever think about how we started?" Clara asked. "Sometimes. Usually with gratitude that we didn't stay there." Adrian pulled her closer. "I was so convinced I could control everything, keep it clean and simple and emotionless." "How'd that work out?" "Terribly. Best failure of my life." He kissed her temple. "You know what tomorrow is?" "Elena's birthday. Also our 2-year anniversary. The original contract expiration date." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I never filed the divorce papers I'd had drawn up. Never even looked at them. They're still in my desk, gathering dust." Clara turned to face him. "Why?" "Because somewhere between the dinners and the fights and falling in love with you, I realized I didn't want an expiration date on this marriage. I wanted forever." Adrian took her hand, which is why I'm asking, properly this time. "Clara Volkov, will you marry me? Not as a business arrangement or a contract, just as two people who love each other, who want to build a life together, who already started a family but want to make it official." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "We're already married." "Legally, yes. But I want to marry you for real. Want to stand in front of our family and friends and choose you, the way I should have from the beginning. So what do you say? Want to marry me again?" Clara laughed through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married again 6 months later, a small ceremony in the mansion gardens that had become truly theirs. Elena toddled down the aisle, throwing flowers with enthusiastic inaccuracy. Clara's father walked her to where Adrian waited, both men crying openly. This time, the vows were real, the promises genuine, the kiss filled with love instead of polite obligation. "I choose you," Adrian said, looking into Clara's eyes. "Every day for the rest of our lives, I choose you." "I choose you too," Clara whispered back. "My husband. For real this time." The years that followed were full and complicated and beautiful. Adrian slowly transformed Volkov Enterprises from purely profit-driven to something with purpose. He started a foundation in Katerina's name, providing medical care to families who couldn't afford it, paying off crushing medical debt, giving people the choice he'd once taken from Clara. "I can't undo what I did to you," he told Clara when the foundation launched. "But I can make sure other people don't face that impossible choice, can turn what we built from ashes into something that helps instead of hurts." Clara's illustration career flourished. She published books, botanical guides illustrated with her precise, beautiful work. She taught classes from a studio they built on the mansion grounds, sharing her art with others. Elena grew into a bright, fierce little girl who had her mother's artistic talent and her father's stubborn determination. When she was 3, she announced she wanted a sibling. Someone to play with, she declared, and share my toys with. Well, some of my toys. Clara and Adrian looked at each other across the dinner table and laughed. "What do you think?" Clara asked. "I think our daughter makes a compelling argument." Adrian's hand found hers. "And I think I'd love to do this again. The whole messy, terrifying, wonderful thing." Their son, James, named for the security chief who'd protected Clara when she needed it, arrived 2 years later. Then, unexpectedly, twin girls 3 years after that. The mansion that had once been cold and sterile transformed into organized chaos. Toys everywhere, art on every wall, laughter echoing through hallways that had been silent, love in every corner of a space that had been built for show but became a home. On their 10th anniversary, Clara woke to find Adrian already awake, watching her in the early morning light. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Just thinking about how wrong I was. About everything." Adrian traced her face with gentle fingers. "I thought I could contract my way into stability. Thought I could keep everything controlled and clean and emotionless. Thought distance was safety. And now? Now I know that the mess is the point. The chaos and the love and the lack of control, that's what makes it worth it." He kissed her softly. "You ruined all my careful plans, Clara Volkov, and I've never been more grateful. I seem to remember you ruining a few of mine too." "Fair point. We're even then." They lay there in comfortable silence, 10 years of history between them, 10 years of learning each other, of choosing each other every day, of building something real from the ashes of an arrangement neither had wanted. Elena burst through the door moments later, siblings trailing behind her like ducklings, climbing into bed with shrieks of "Happy anniversary" and "Presents." "And can we have pancakes?" Adrian caught Clara's eye over the chaos of their children, and the look they shared said everything. This was what they'd built. This beautiful, messy, love-filled life. Not perfect, not controlled, not what either had planned, but real and chosen, and more than either had ever dreamed possible. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet again, Clara found Adrian in what had once been his study, but was now their shared office. He was looking at something on his desk, the original contract, she realized, the one that had started everything. "Thinking about burning it?" she asked. "Actually, I was thinking about framing it." Adrian looked up with a smile. "As a reminder of how spectacularly wrong I can be, and how grateful I am that you gave me the chance to prove it." Clara moved to stand beside him, reading over the careful legal language that had once defined their entire relationship. It seemed ridiculous now, impossibly clinical, a laughable attempt to control the uncontrollable. "Frame it," she said, "but maybe in the closet, where the kids won't ask questions we're not ready to answer." "Deal." Adrian pulled her into his lap, and Clara settled against him, exactly where she belonged. "No regrets? About marrying you? Never. Even though I blackmailed you? You gave me an impossible choice in an impossible situation. But you also gave me this." Clara gestured to the house around them, to the life they'd built. "You gave me a family and a home, and a love I didn't think existed, so no regrets." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "I love you. I don't say it enough. You say it every day. In words, maybe. But Clara, I love you in ways I don't have language for. In the way you've transformed every part of my life. In the way you make me want to be better. In the way you gave me a family when I'd given up on ever having one." Clara turned to kiss him properly. "I love you too, even when you leave extra screws on the floor when assembling furniture. That was 1 time, 3 times, but who's counting?" They laughed, and in that laughter was years of history, of growing together, of choosing each other over and over again. Later that night, Clara stood in the nursery, now converted to a playroom since the twins had their own room, and looked at the chaos of toys and books and art supplies. The mansion that had once been a prison had become exactly what Adrian had promised that night in Austria. A A home. Not because of the expensive furniture or the perfect architecture or the carefully maintained grounds, but because of the love that filled every corner, the laughter that echoed through the halls, the children who ran through rooms that had once been showpieces, the man who'd learned to be a husband and father and partner instead of just a businessman. Clara had come here as a captive, bound by debt and obligation and fear. She'd planned her escape, counted the days until freedom, built walls to protect herself from caring too much. But somewhere between the dinners and the conversations and the night Adrian had held her through nightmares, those walls had crumbled. The captive had become a wife. The arrangement had become a marriage. The stranger had become the love of her life. And the beautiful prison had become home. "Clara?" Adrian's voice came from the doorway. "You okay?" She turned, smiled at her husband, backlit by the hallway light. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how you promised me 2 years and then we'd both be free. That was the deal." Adrian moved into the room, wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I lied. Turns out I never want to be free of you. That okay?" Clara leaned back against him, his warmth solid and real and chosen. "More than okay. Because I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Volkov." Best sentence I've ever served. They stood there in the quiet playroom, in the house that had witnessed their transformation, and Clara felt something settle deep in her bones. This was where she belonged, not because a contract said so, not because debt demanded it, but because she'd chosen it. Every single day, she chose it. And every single day, Adrian chose her right back. That was the real magic. Not the mansion or the money or the carefully constructed appearances, but the choice, the daily decision to love each other, to build a family, to transform a transaction into something transcendent. Clara had started this journey thinking love was something other people got, that she'd survive her sentence and escape to freedom and maybe find something real somewhere else. But she'd learned the truth along the way. Love wasn't something she'd been denied. It was something she'd built, brick by brick, dinner by dinner, choice by choice, with a man who'd started as a stranger and become her everything. And in the end, the woman who'd been purchased became priceless. The marriage built on contracts became unbreakable, and the beautiful prison became the freest place Clara had ever known, because she was exactly where she chose to be, exactly where she belonged, home.